The 68th floor conference room went dark at exactly 2:47 p.m., 93 minutes before the biggest deal in Orion Power Corporation's history
You can
would
stop
either
pretending to
close
be
or
surprised.
collapse.
We
CEO
both know why
Alexandra
you're really
Sterling
here.
stood frozen as emergency lights flickered on, casting red shadows across the faces of her terrified executive team. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city blazed with afternoon sunlight, mocking the darkness that now threatened to destroy everything she'd built. In the basement, a maintenance technician named Daniel Carter heard the backup generator fail with a sound like thunder. And he knew, with the cold certainty of someone who designed that exact system 5 years earlier, that this wasn't just a power outage. This was war. Before we dive into this story, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The emergency alarm cut through Orion Tower like a scream. Daniel Carter was 3 floors below ground when the lights died, his hands buried in the guts of a malfunctioning HVAC unit that serviced the building's southern wing. The sudden silence hit first, that eerie absence of the constant mechanical hum that every technician learns to hear beneath the surface of a working building. Then came the darkness, absolute and suffocating, before the battery-powered emergency strips began glowing their anemic red. He straightened slowly, wiping grease from his fingers with a rag that had seen better decades. Around him, the basement mechanical room stretched into shadow, a vast concrete cathedral filled with the sleeping giants of modern infrastructure. Water pumps, climate control systems, electrical substations, and, at the far end, behind a security door he'd installed himself, the backup generator that should have roared to life the instant the main power failed. Should have. Daniel's jaw tightened as he listened to the silence where that familiar diesel rumble should have been. He'd maintained that generator personally for 3 years, tested it monthly, knew every bolt, every relay, every quirk in its temperament, like he knew the freckles on his daughter's nose. It wasn't running. His phone lit up in his pocket, the screen washing his weathered face in blue light. The group text from building operations was already blowing up. Generator failure, main power out. Investors arriving at 4:30, all hands emergency. Daniel was already moving toward the generator room, his work boots eating up the distance in long, purposeful strides. Behind him, he heard other technicians emerging from their work areas, voices rising in confusion and panic. He ignored them. Panic was noise. Noise was distraction. And distraction killed you when you were working with high-voltage systems in the dark. The security door to the generator room hung open. Someone had bypassed the lock. Daniel's eyes narrowed. The generator was housed separately for safety reasons, sealed behind fireproof walls and equipped with its own ventilation system. Only senior maintenance staff had access, and there were strict protocols about who could work on it. Protocols someone had violated. He stepped inside and swept his flashlight across the massive machine. The Cummins QSK-60 generator crouched in the center of the room like a mechanical beast, its industrial yellow paint dulled by years of service. Cooling lines snaked across its surface. Exhaust pipes climbed toward ventilation shafts that would carry diesel fumes to the surface. Control panels bristled with indicators, all of them dark and dead. Daniel approached the main console and opened the diagnostic panel. What he found made his blood run cold. Someone had been inside the system, recently. Wiring harnesses hung loose, safety interlocks had been disabled, and the main circuit board, the brain that controlled the generator's automatic startup sequence, showed scorch marks consistent with a deliberate surge. This wasn't mechanical failure. This was sabotage. "Carter!" the shout came from the doorway. Daniel turned to find Marcus Webb, the building operations manager, silhouetted against the red emergency lighting. Marcus was 20 years younger than Daniel, armed with an engineering degree from Stanford and an ego that filled most rooms he entered. He wore his anxiety like cologne. It preceded him everywhere. "What the hell happened?" Marcus demanded, stepping inside. "Why isn't the backup running?" "Someone killed it," Daniel said quietly, gesturing toward the damaged control board. "This didn't fail. It was sabotaged." Marcus went pale. "That's impossible. Who would—" "I don't know. But we've got bigger problems right now." Daniel checked his watch, 3:02 p.m. "Investors arrive in 88 minutes. How long until the city can restore main power?" "They're saying 6 hours minimum. Tree took down a transformer 3 blocks away. Marcus ran a hand through his hair. Jesus, Sterling is going to lose her mind. The presentation depends on the building demo system. It showcases our new energy management software. Without power, we've got nothing to demonstrate. Daniel was already pulling open the generator's access panels, his mind racing through possibilities. Get me Tony and Sarah from electrical. I need a full inventory of spare components, voltage regulators, circuit boards, anything we can use to rebuild the control system. Rebuild? Marcus stared at him. Daniel, that's a computerized system. We'd need factory parts, specialized tools, certification protocols. We don't have time for factory parts. Daniel's voice was flat, certain. We have 86 minutes. Either we improvise a solution or this company loses $1 billion contract. Your choice. For a moment, Marcus just looked at him, really looked at him, perhaps for the first time since Daniel had started working at Orion 3 years ago. Saw past the grease-stained coveralls and the gray threading through his dark hair. Saw the absolute confidence in his weathered face, the steady competence in his scarred hands. You think you can actually fix this? Marcus asked quietly. I know I can, Daniel replied. I designed this system. Okay. 68 floors above, Alexandra Sterling stood at the head of the emergency response meeting and tried to project a calm she absolutely did not feel. The executive conference room was crowded with her senior leadership team, their faces underlit by laptop screens and phone flashlights, creating a scene that looked more like a seance than a corporate strategy session. Through the windows, the city sprawled in its usual chaotic glory, utterly indifferent to the crisis unfolding inside Orion Tower. Status, Alexandra said, cutting through the rising murmur of anxious conversation. David Chen, her chief technology officer, looked up from his laptop. Main power is definitely out for the foreseeable future. The city's working on the transformer, but they're saying 6 to 8 hours. Our backup generator failed to engage, and facilities is investigating why. Investigating. Alexandra's voice could have cut glass. We have investors from Singapore arriving in... She checked her Rolex. Exactly 83 minutes to see a demonstration of software that requires full building power to function. I don't need investigation. I need solutions. We're exploring options, offered Rebecca Marsh, the chief operating officer. We could move the presentation to the Riverside Conference Center. The entire demonstration is built around our infrastructure, Alexandra interrupted. The energy management system controls this building. That's the whole point. We can't just relocate to a hotel ballroom and show them PowerPoint slides. They're investing $400 million in technology they need to see working. Silence fell across the table. Outside the windows, a helicopter passed, its rotors thrumming against the glass. Alexandra felt the familiar tightness building in her chest, the physical manifestation of pressure she'd learned to weaponize, to transform into the steel will that had carried her from junior analyst to CEO in 12 years. She was 39 years old, the youngest person ever to run Orion Power Corporation, the only woman in the company's 70-year history to hold the position, and she'd achieved it all by refusing to accept the word impossible. Who's working on the generator? She asked. Chen consulted his phone. Building operations has their team on it. Manager is a guy named Webb. He's coordinating with the maintenance staff. I want to talk to whoever's actually doing the work, Alexandra said. Not coordinators, not managers. The person with their hands on the equipment. A pause. I'll find out. Alexandra turned to face the windows, her reflection ghost-like against the afternoon sky. Behind her, she could feel the weight of their doubt, their barely concealed fear that this crisis would be the thing that finally proved she wasn't up to the position, that her father had been right to oppose her appointment, that the board had made a mistake. She'd built her entire career on proving people wrong. She wasn't about to stop now. In the basement, Daniel had assembled his team. Tony Reeves, a wiry electrician in his 50s with hands steady enough to wire detonators, crouched beside him, examining the damaged control board. Sarah Chen, no relation to the CTO, was a systems specialist barely out of her 20s, but she'd spent 2 years in the Navy working on nuclear reactor controls, and she understood power systems at a molecular level. It's fried, Tony said, stating the obvious. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing. bypassed the surge protectors, sent a spike straight through the microcontroller, things completely dead. Sarah was already scrolling through schematics on her tablet. The QSK-60 uses a proprietary power command control system. We'd need to order replacement parts from Cummins, and even with expedited shipping, we're looking at 3 days minimum. We're not waiting 3 days, Daniel said. He pointed to a bank of industrial shelving against the far wall. What do we have in inventory? Tony walked over and started pulling boxes. Bunch of generic voltage regulators, some Arduino boards from that automation project last year. Relay switches, transformers, basic components. Arduino, Daniel repeated, a plan beginning to form in his mind. That's just a programmable microcontroller. It's not that different from what the power command system does. Receives sensor data, makes decisions, sends control signals. Sarah looked at him like he'd suggested building a rocket from cardboard. You want to replace a $10,000 industrial control system with a $100 hobbyist circuit board? I want to create a bypass system that can perform the basic functions we need, Daniel corrected. We're not trying to replicate every feature. We just need to monitor fuel levels, control the starter motor, regulate voltage output, and manage the connection to the building's electrical system. That's it. Tony was nodding slowly. It's insane, but theoretically possible. How theoretically? Sarah challenged. 70-30, Daniel said. 70% it works and we restore power. 30% it fails and nothing happens. 0% it makes things worse because they can't get worse than they already are. Unless we blow something up, Tony muttered, which is why we'll work carefully and follow proper safety protocols. Daniel checked his watch. 3:24 p.m. We have 66 minutes. Sarah, start programming the Arduino with basic startup and regulation sequences. Tony, help me wire the bypass circuit into the generator's control pathways. We'll need to isolate the damaged components and create new signal routes. Sarah was already opening her laptop. I'm going to need coffee. Emergency power's out, Tony reminded her. No coffee. Then I'm going to need motivation. What happens if we actually pull this off? Daniel thought of Lily's robotics showcase, scheduled to start at 6 p.m. across the city. Thought of the promise he'd made her this morning over breakfast. The excited way she'd described the robot arm she'd been building for 3 months. We keep our jobs, he said simply, and the company survives. That's motivation enough. But even as he said it, his phone buzzed with another text from his daughter. Dad, remember you promised. Coach says I present at 6:30. Don't be late, please. He typed back quickly. I'll be there. Promise. Then he silenced the phone and focused on the immediate crisis, pushing away the gnawing anxiety that he might be making a promise he couldn't keep. Alexandra descended into the basement at 3:41 p.m., flanked by Marcus Webb and David Chen. She'd never been in the mechanical levels before. The contrast with the executive floors was almost comical, where her office featured floor-to-ceiling windows and furniture that cost more than most cars. This subterranean world was pure functionality. Exposed pipes, concrete floors, the smell of machine oil and electricity. And somehow, despite the emergency, it felt more real than anything happening 68 floors above. Marcus led them through a maze of corridors to the generator room. Inside, Alexandra found 3 people working in focused silence. An older electrician methodically stripping wires, a young woman typing rapidly on a laptop, and a man in grease-stained coveralls who was deep inside the generator's control panel, working by flashlight. The man in coveralls looked up as they entered, and Alexandra felt a jolt of recognition. She'd seen him before, a ghost presence in the building, someone she'd passed in hallways or service elevators without really seeing, one of the invisible people who kept the machinery of modern life functioning. This is Daniel Carter, Marcus said awkwardly. He's our senior maintenance technician. Daniel, this is... I know who she is, Daniel said quietly, setting down his tools. He straightened, wiping his hands on his coveralls, and met Alexandra's eyes directly. No deference, no intimidation. Just the level gaze of someone who had nothing to prove and nothing to hide. It was disconcerting. Mr. Carter, Alexandra said crisply, I need to understand our situation. Can you restore power before 4:30? That's the plan. I don't need a plan. I need a guarantee. As something flickered in Daniel's expression, not anger exactly, but a kind of weary recognition, as if he'd heard this speech before and already knew how it would end. "There are no guarantees with improvised repairs," he said evenly, "but I'd put our odds at 70% success." 70%? Alexandra felt her control beginning to slip. "I'm about to host investors worth $400 million, and you're giving me 70%? Would you prefer I lie and say 100? Daniel asked. The question wasn't sarcastic. It was genuine, as if he was actually curious what kind of leadership she represented. The challenge in that simple question made Alexandra's blood heat. She was accustomed to people who shaped their words to please her, who told her what she wanted to hear, who managed up with the practiced ease of corporate survival. This man did none of those things. "What I'd prefer," she said coldly, "is competence. I'd prefer that the backup systems I've paid millions to maintain actually functioned when needed. I'd prefer not to be standing in a basement discussing odds when I should be preparing for the most important meeting of the fiscal year." Daniel absorbed this without flinching. The generator was sabotaged. Someone deliberately destroyed the control system. That's why it didn't engage automatically. Sabotaged? Chen leaned forward. "You're sure?" "Completely sure." Daniel gestured to the damaged circuit board, now lying on a workbench. Someone with technical knowledge and building access bypassed the security protocols and fried the brain. This was intentional. Alexandra felt the implications clicking into place like tumblers in a lock. Who? "I don't know yet, but security should pull footage from this area for the past 48 hours. "I'll handle that," Chen said, already typing on his phone. Alexandra turned her attention back to Daniel. "How are you planning to fix this?" For the next 3 minutes, Daniel explained the bypass system they were building, using language stripped of jargon, describing complex technical concepts in terms she could understand. As he talked, Alexandra found herself reassessing her initial judgment. This wasn't some blue-collar technician stumbling through a crisis. This was someone who understood systems at a fundamental level, who could see solutions where others saw only problems. "Where did you learn to do this?" she asked when he finished. "Army Corps of Engineers," Daniel replied. "I spent 8 years building and repairing infrastructure in places where replacement parts didn't exist and failure meant people died. You learn to improvise." "And after the Army?" "Various things." His tone suggested the conversation was over, but Alexandra wasn't finished. She glanced at the laptop where the young woman was working, saw lines of code scrolling past, looked at the workbench covered with circuit components and hand-drawn schematics, felt the organized intensity of their effort. An idea formed, reckless, possibly cruel, but perfectly calibrated to apply maximum pressure. "I'm going to make you an offer, Mr. Carter," she said. "Fix this generator and restore full power to this building before 4:30, and I'll personally ensure you receive a performance bonus of $50,000. Daniel's expression didn't change. "And if I fail?" "Then you're fired." Alexandra let the words hang in the air. "Not just you, your entire team. Because if this company loses this deal, we'll have to make significant cuts. And I'll start with the departments that couldn't deliver when it mattered most." Silence fell across the generator room. Tony and Sarah had stopped working, staring at Alexandra with open shock. Marcus looked ill. "That's not fair," Sarah said quietly. We didn't sabotage anything. We're trying to fix someone else's." "Fair?" Alexandra cut her off. "Life isn't fair. Business isn't fair. What's fair about a competitor sabotaging our systems to steal our deal? What's fair about investors who'll walk away because of a problem we didn't create?" She turned back to Daniel. "I'm not interested in fair. I'm interested in results. Can you deliver them or not?" Daniel looked at her for a long moment, and Alexandra saw something in his eyes she couldn't quite name. Not anger, not fear, but something deeper and more complicated. Something that understood exactly what kind of person she was and had decided to engage anyway. "We'll deliver," he said quietly. "Excellent." Alexandra checked her watch. 3:58 p.m. "You have 52 minutes. I suggest you use them wisely." She turned and walked out, Chen and Marcus trailing behind her. The moment the executives were gone, Sarah exploded. "That absolute—" She bit off the word, her face flushed with anger. "Who does she think she is? We're trying to save her company, and she threatens to fire us?" "Someone who's scared and doesn't know how to show it," Daniel said calmly, already returning to his work. "Forget her. We've got 51 minutes. Daniel, Tony's voice was serious. You sure about this? We could just tell her it's impossible. Let the system stay down. Not our fault someone sabotaged it. And then what? Daniel asked, connecting a wire to the Arduino board with steady hands. Company loses the deal, stock price crashes, budget cuts follow. How many people work in this building? 300? 400? How many of them have families depending on their paychecks? Not our responsibility to save everyone, Tony muttered, but he was already reaching for his wire strippers. Maybe not, Daniel agreed, but we've got the skills to try. That makes it our choice. He thought again of Lily, waiting across the city for him to show up at her competition. Thought of all the times he'd had to choose between work and fatherhood, between the responsibilities that paid the bills and the promises that defined who he wanted to be. But right now, in this moment, there was no choice. There were just problems that needed solving and people whose livelihoods depended on him doing what he did best. Sarah, he said, how's the programming coming? Almost done. Her fingers flew across the keyboard. Basic startup sequence is loaded. I'm building in fail-safes and emergency shutoffs. If anything goes wrong, the system will disconnect automatically. Good. Tony, start running the bypass circuit from the Arduino to the generator's control inputs. We'll need manual overrides on every major system in case the automation fails. On it. Daniel pulled up the wiring diagram on his own tablet and began tracing signal pathways, marking which components they could safely bypass and which required full functionality. The generator had dozens of safety interlocks designed to prevent dangerous situations, overheating, fuel leaks, electrical surges. They'd have to preserve those while rebuilding the control logic from scratch. It was like performing surgery while the patient was running a marathon. His phone buzzed again. Another text from Lily. Dad, I'm getting nervous. What if I mess up my presentation? He wanted to call her, to offer the reassurance she needed, but he had 48 minutes and 1,000 things that could still go wrong. He typed back, You're going to be amazing, just like you practiced. I believe in you. Then he set the phone aside and focused everything, every bit of knowledge, experience, and skill he'd accumulated across 8 years in the military and 15 years since, on the problem in front of him. At 4:15 p.m., Alexandra stood in the darkened conference room and watched Singapore's delegation emerge from their limousine 68 floors below. They were early. They're early, Rebecca Marsh said unnecessarily, voicing what everyone was thinking. Alexandra's phone buzzed with an update from Chen. Security reviewing footage. Generator room accessed yesterday at 11 p.m. by someone in maintenance uniform. Can ID face. Avoided cameras. She typed back, Who had building access at that time? Checking badge swipe records. Alexandra set down her phone and smoothed her suit jacket, forcing her expression into something resembling calm confidence. Around her, the executive team was arranging themselves like pieces on a chessboard, each one trying to position themselves advantageously for whatever was about to happen. The elevator chimed. James Tan entered first, his silver hair immaculate despite international travel, his tailored suit speaking of wealth that needed no advertisement. Behind him came his team, analysts, lawyers, technical specialists. 7 people who'd flown 14 hours to see technology that currently couldn't be demonstrated. James, Alexandra said warmly, crossing the room with her hand extended. Welcome to Orion. I hope your flight was comfortable. Long but productive, Tan replied, his handshake firm and brief. He glanced at the emergency lighting, one eyebrow rising fractionally. Power issues? A temporary situation, Alexandra said smoothly. We're actually using it as an impromptu demonstration of our crisis management protocols. Our backup systems should be engaging any moment. It was a gamble wrapped in a lie, wrapped in desperate hope. Tan smiled politely. Of course. Alexandra guided them toward the presentation area, talking steadily about quarterly growth metrics and market penetration, buying time with every word. Her mind kept flashing to the basement, to Daniel Carter and his improvised solution, to the 70% odds that now felt wildly optimistic. 4:18 p.m., 4:21 p.m., EM, 4:24 p.m. James Tan was growing impatient. Alexandra could see it in the way he checked his watch, the slight tension entering his polite smile. His analysts were exchanging glances. The lawyers were whispering. This was falling apart. In the basement, Daniel was running out of time and options. The bypass circuit was complete. The Arduino was programmed and tested. Every connection had been double-checked, but when they'd run the first test 30 seconds ago, the generator had made a grinding sound and immediately shut down. Something was still wrong. Fuel pressure, Sarah said, staring at her diagnostic readout. The improvised controller isn't compensating properly for fuel flow. The engine's not getting enough diesel to maintain combustion. Daniel dove back into the control panel, his mind racing. The fuel system was mechanical, but its regulation depended on signals from the control computer. They needed to adjust the Arduino's output to match what the fuel injectors expected. "What's the voltage differential?" he asked. "0.7 volts low. Add a step-up transformer to the fuel control line. Small one, just enough to boost the signal." Tony was already pulling components. "This one? Perfect. Wire it in series with the fuel pressure sensor output." 4:26 p.m. They worked in synchronized silence, 3 people moving like a pit crew, each one executing their part of a dance they were inventing as they performed it. Daniel felt the familiar hyper-focus that had carried him through firefights and disasters, the narrowing of reality down to hands and tools, and the immediate problem. Sarah finished soldering the transformer into place. "Done. Testing circuit." The laptop screen showed green across all connections. "Okay," Daniel said, straightening. His back ached from crouching. His hands were smeared with grease and blood from a small cut he didn't remember getting. "This is it. Everybody clear of the generator. Tony, kill the emergency fuel shutoff. Sarah, initialize the Arduino." They took their positions. Daniel approached this control panel and placed his hand on the master switch, a simple mechanical toggle that would send the startup signal to their improvised system. For a moment, he thought of all the ways this could fail. Electrical fire, fuel explosion, system cascade that took out the entire building's grid. He thought of Lily, waiting for him. He thought of 400 people whose jobs depended on a billion-dollar deal. He threw the switch. 68 floors above, Alexandra was in the middle of a sentence about market penetration when the lights came on. The conference room blazed to life. Overheads, presentation screens, climate control humming smoothly, as if nothing had ever been wrong. Through the windows, the city skyline reflected in glass walls that were suddenly illuminated from within. James Ton stopped mid-sentence, looking around with genuine surprise. "Our backup systems," Alexandra said, her voice steady despite her pounding heart. "As I was saying, our technology performs even under adverse conditions." She pulled out her phone and opened the building management application, the same software they were here to demonstrate. The screen showed every system in Orion Tower coming online: HVAC zones, electrical distribution, security systems, even the espresso machine in the executive break room. "As you can see," she continued, pulling up the real-time energy monitoring display, "our software provides complete visibility and control over every aspect of building infrastructure. The generator that just activated, it's now being regulated by the same AI-driven optimization algorithms we're proposing to deploy across your Singapore portfolio." Tan leaned forward, his skepticism shifting into interest. "The backup engaged automatically?" "With intelligent load balancing and predictive maintenance capabilities," Alexandra confirmed, expanding the display. The system knew precisely which circuits to prioritize, how to stage the startup to prevent surge damage, and how to optimize fuel consumption. It was all true, even if the system in question was currently a technician in the basement with his hands on manual controls. Chen caught her eye and nodded subtly. The demonstration servers were online. They could proceed. "Shall we begin?" Alexandra said, gesturing toward the presentation area. For the next hour, they walked through every aspect of the technology. The Singapore delegation asked sharp questions and received detailed answers. They watched real-time demonstrations of energy optimization, predictive failure analysis, automated crisis response. And beneath it all, 68 floors down, Daniel Carter sat at the makeshift control station and manually adjusted generator output to keep the building systems running smoothly, while Sarah monitored the Arduino and Tony stood ready to throw the emergency shutoff if anything went wrong. It was the most technically sophisticated presentation Alexandra had ever delivered, powered by the most primitive backup system imaginable. And it was working. At 5:47 p.m., James Tan extended his hand across the conference table. "You have a deal," he said. "400 million, subject to standard due diligence. My lawyers will draw up the terms." Alexandra shook his hand, her smile professional and controlled, revealing none of the overwhelming relief flooding through her. "We look forward to the partnership." After the Singapore delegation departed, her executive team erupted in celebration. Champagne appeared. Chen had apparently stashed bottles in his office for exactly this occasion. People were laughing, embracing, already spinning the story of how they'd pulled off the impossible. Alexandra accepted their congratulations with gracious efficiency, then quietly slipped away. She took the elevator down, bypassing the executive floors, descending past the office levels and conference rooms, past the mechanical systems and storage areas, down into the basement she'd visited only once before today. The generator room was quieter now. Tony was packing up tools. Sarah sat at her laptop, documenting their improvised solution with the methodical care of someone who knew it would need to be properly rebuilt. Daniel stood beside the generator, one hand resting on its yellow housing, looking at the machine with something like affection. "Mr. Carter," Alexandra said from the doorway. He turned, his expression tired but composed. "Ms. Sterling, I heard you closed the deal. Thanks to you." She stepped inside, acutely aware that she was entering his domain now, a space where titles and corner offices meant nothing. "I need to know something. When you said you designed this system, what did you mean?" Daniel was quiet for a moment, as if deciding how much truth to share. 5 years ago, I worked for Cummins as a senior systems engineer, he said finally. I designed custom generator installations for high-rise applications. This specific system, he patted the machine, I built it, specified every component, programmed the original control algorithms, even consulted on the installation. And now you're a maintenance technician making $40,000 a year? His smile held no bitterness. Now I'm a single father with flexible hours and no travel requirements. Priorities change. Alexandra thought about that, about the choices people made that didn't fit on a resume, about the invisible calculations of value that had nothing to do with salary or title. "The bonus I promised," she said, $50,000. You'll have it in Friday's payroll." Appreciated, but I wasn't doing it for money. I know. She did know somehow, had known it the moment he'd looked at her in this room and agreed to attempt the impossible. "What were you doing it for?" "My daughter has a robotics competition tonight," Daniel said, checking his watch. "Starts at 6. I promised I'd be there." It was 5:52 p.m. "Then you should go," Alexandra said. "You've more than earned it." But Daniel was already shaking his head. "Generator needs monitoring for at least another hour to make sure the improvised controls stay stable. Can't risk it failing again." "I'll have the night shift monitor it. With respect, they won't know what to look for. This system's held together with wire and prayer. If something starts drifting, someone needs to recognize it immediately." Alexandra understood duty, had built her entire life around it, but she'd never quite understood sacrifice, the quiet kind, the invisible kind, the kind that happened in basements where no one was watching. "How far is the competition?" she asked. "Across the city. 20 minutes in good traffic, 40 in bad." She pulled out her phone. "My driver can get you there in 15. He's very good at ignoring speed limits." Daniel blinked. "Ms. Sterling," "Alexandra," she corrected. "And this isn't a request. You saved my company today. The least I can do is make sure you don't miss your daughter's presentation." She glanced at Sarah. "Can you monitor the generator?" "Absolutely," Sarah said immediately. "And I'll stay as backup," Tony added. "We've got this, Daniel. Go." For a moment, Daniel looked torn, caught between the ingrained responsibility to see a job through and the equally powerful need to keep a promise to the person who mattered most. "Go," Alexandra said again, more gently. "That's not a suggestion. It's an order from your CEO." Daniel's smile transformed his whole face. "Yes, ma'am." He grabbed his jacket and headed for the door, moving with the efficient speed of someone who'd just been given an unexpected gift. At the threshold, he paused and looked back. "Thank you," he said simply. "Thank you," Alexandra replied. She watched him disappear down the corridor, listened to his footsteps fade, then turned to study the generator that had nearly destroyed everything and had ended up saving it all. Her phone buzzed. A text from Chen. Security footage analyzed. Badge swipe from maintenance uniform belongs to Greg Hammond. Recently terminated employee. Building access wasn't properly deactivated. Police have been notified. So there was her saboteur, a disgruntled former employee who'd found the perfect revenge and nearly succeeded. Almost succeeded, Alexandra corrected herself. But not quite. Because Daniel Carter had been in the basement when the lights went out, and he'd known exactly what to do. She thought about probability and luck, about the unlikely convergence of crisis and capability. Thought about the genius hidden in plain sight, the solutions waiting in places she'd never thought to look. Her entire career, Alexandra had believed that success came from careful planning and ruthless execution. That you succeeded by controlling variables, minimizing risk, building systems that left nothing to chance. Today had taught her something different. Sometimes the most valuable asset wasn't the one you'd planned for. Sometimes salvation came from the person you'd never noticed, working in the basement where executives never visited. Sometimes the machinery that really mattered wasn't the generator at all. It was the human being who understood how to fix it. Daniel made it to the robotics competition at 6:23 p.m., 7 minutes before Lily's scheduled presentation. He found her in the prep area, wearing her team jersey and adjusting the gripper arm on her robot with the intense focus she'd inherited from him. When she looked up and saw him standing there, still in his work clothes smelling of diesel and sweat, her face split into the kind of pure joy that made every difficult choice worthwhile. "Dad!" She ran to him, and he caught her in a hug that lifted her off the ground. "You made it!" "Of course I made it," he said, setting her down. "I promised, didn't I?" "Yeah, but—" She glanced at his grease-stained coveralls. "Were you working?" "Emergency at the office, but I'm here now. That's what matters." She nodded, accepting this the way she'd learned to accept the complicated calculus of his work schedule. "Want to see my robot before I present?" For the next 7 minutes, Daniel watched his daughter demonstrate the robot arm she'd built from scratch. Listened to her explain the programming logic, the mechanical linkages, the problem-solving that had gone into every design decision. She was brilliant, confident, absolutely fearless, and he'd almost missed it. When her name was called, he watched from the audience as Lily presented her project to the judges, watched her handle their questions with the same calm competence he tried to bring to his own work. Watched her face light up when they announced that her robot had placed second and qualified for the regional finals. Later, driving home with his daughter chattering excitedly about the competition and the prize and the next level of challenges ahead, Daniel thought about the day's impossible demands. Thought about Alexandra Sterling and her ruthless ultimatum. Thought about the generator he'd saved and the company he'd rescued. But mostly, he thought about this moment. This ordinary, extraordinary moment of being exactly where he needed to be for the person who needed him most. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "This is Alexandra Sterling. Thank you again for today. The bonus will be in Friday's payroll, as promised. Also, your daughter is lucky to have you." As Daniel smiled and set the phone aside, tomorrow he'd return to being invisible. Return to the basement, to the maintenance work, to the quiet competence that no one noticed until everything fell apart. But tonight, he was exactly where he was supposed to be. And that, more than any bonus or recognition or gratitude, was what success actually looked like. Friday morning arrived with the weight of unfinished business. Daniel clocked in at 7:30, his usual time, and found the basement maintenance area buzzing with an energy that felt different from the normal pre-shift routine. Tony was already at his workstation, but instead of reviewing the day's repair orders, he was staring at his computer screen with an expression somewhere between disbelief and vindication. "You see your paycheck yet?" Tony asked without looking up. Daniel set down his thermos and pulled up the payroll portal on his phone. The direct deposit notification showed a number that made him blink and check twice to make sure he was reading the decimal point correctly. $50,000. Exactly as promised. "Holy hell," he muttered. "She actually did it," Tony said, shaking his head. "Sterling actually paid out. I figured she'd find some legal loophole, some corporate excuse to back out once the crisis was over." Sarah emerged from the equipment cage carrying a new voltage regulator, still in its factory packaging. "You both got yours too, right? She gave bonuses to all three of us, 15,000 each for Tony and me." Her eyes were bright with the kind of hope that money could bring when you weren't used to having much of it. I can finally afford that certification course I've been putting off. Or a decent car that doesn't sound like it's dying every time you start it, Tony suggested. That too. Sarah set down the regulator and turned to Daniel. What are you going to do with yours? Daniel thought about Lily's college fund, currently sitting at a number that would cover maybe 2 semesters at a state school if tuition didn't keep climbing. Thought about the medical bills from her mother's final year that still arrived occasionally like ghosts demanding payment. Thought about the leak in their apartment bathroom that the landlord kept promising to fix but never did. Boring, responsible stuff, he said. College savings? Debt? Maybe a new water heater before ours explodes. You're no fun, Sarah said, but she smiled when she said it. Marcus Webb appeared in the doorway, looking uncharacteristically humble. Daniel, you got a minute? Sterling wants to see you upstairs. The basement crew went quiet. Being summoned to the executive floors was rarely a good thing in anyone's experience. It usually meant either getting blamed for something that had gone wrong or being interrogated about something that was about to. When? Daniel asked. Now. She's in her office. Daniel exchanged a glance with Tony, who just shrugged as if to say the rules had changed and nobody knew what anything meant anymore. He grabbed his clipboard, a habit from the military, always bring documentation to any meeting, and followed Marcus to the elevator. They rode up in silence, watching the floor numbers climb past the offices and conference rooms Daniel rarely saw, past the mid-level executive suites, all the way to the 68th floor where the real power lived. The elevator doors opened onto a reception area that looked like it had been designed by someone who confused minimalism with intimidation. Everything was white marble and brushed steel, arranged with the kind of precision that made you afraid to touch anything. The receptionist, a polished woman in her 30s wearing a headset that probably cost more than Daniel's monthly rent, looked up with professional efficiency. Mr. Carter, Miss Sterling is expecting you. Go right in. Marcus gestured toward the massive oak door at the end of the corridor, then stepped back as if he'd completed his escort duty and wanted no part of whatever happened next. Daniel approached the door and knocked twice. Come in, came Alexandra's voice from inside. Her office was everything the reception area had promised, and more. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view that stretched across the entire city, making even the tallest buildings look small. The furniture was the kind of expensive simplicity that required a designer's touch to look casual. Everything about the space said one thing: power. Alexandra sat behind a desk that could have doubled as a landing strip, working on a laptop, dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Daniel's entire wardrobe. She looked up when he entered, and something in her expression shifted. Not quite a smile, but a relaxation of the CEO armor she usually wore. Daniel, she said, closing the laptop. Thank you for coming up. Please sit. He took one of the chairs across from her desk, acutely aware that his work boots had probably left marks on her pristine carpet. You wanted to see me, Ms. Sterling? Alexandra, she corrected. I think we're past formalities after Wednesday. She leaned back in her chair, studying him with the kind of attention that made Daniel feel like he was being assessed for qualities he didn't know he possessed. I wanted to talk to you about your future here at Orion. Here it comes, Daniel thought. The real reason for the meeting. The bonus had been the carrot. Now came the stick. I've been reviewing your personnel file, Alexandra continued. 8 years in the Army Corps of Engineers, honorable discharge. 2 years at Cummins as a systems engineer. Excellent performance reviews. Then you left to take a maintenance position here at 40% of your previous salary. She paused. Why? Daniel had answered this question before, in different forms, for different people. HR during his interview. Colleagues who couldn't understand why someone with his credentials was changing air filters and fixing toilets. His daughter once, when she was old enough to understand that other kids' dads had jobs with offices and titles. My daughter needed stability, he said simply. Maintenance work has predictable hours. No travel, no deployments. After her mother died, that mattered more than salary. Alexandra's expression softened almost imperceptibly. I'm sorry for your loss. How long ago? 4 years. Cancer. It was difficult. I can imagine. She was quiet for a moment, as if genuinely considering the weight of single parenthood and grief. Then she pulled a folder from her desk drawer and set it between them. I have a proposition for you. We need a new director of infrastructure operations. The position oversees all building systems: mechanical, electrical, security, automation. It's a management role, but it requires someone who understands the technical foundation, someone who can think strategically while still getting their hands dirty when necessary. Daniel opened the folder and saw a job description that looked like it had been written specifically for his skill set, but it was the salary figure at the bottom that made him pause. $180,000, plus benefits, plus performance bonuses, more than 4 times what he currently made. "That's a substantial offer," he said carefully. "You saved this company $400 million with $100 worth of spare parts and some ingenuity," Alexandra replied. "I'd say you've earned it. But more than that, Wednesday showed me something I should have seen earlier. This building, this entire operation, runs on infrastructure most people never notice. We treat it like background noise until something breaks. That's a mistake. I want someone in leadership who understands that the foundation matters as much as the floors we build on top of it." It was a compelling vision, and the money would transform everything for him and Lily. College would be covered. The medical debt would disappear. They could move out of their cramped apartment into something with actual space. But Daniel had learned long ago that every opportunity came with costs that weren't listed in the job description. "What would the hours look like?" he asked. "Flexible, mostly. You'd set your own schedule, manage your team's coverage, but I won't lie. There will be emergencies. Late nights, weekends. When systems fail, you'll need to be available." There it was. The cost hidden in the compensation. "I appreciate the offer," Daniel said slowly, "but I have a daughter who's 12 years old. She needs me present, not just providing. I learned that lesson the hard way in the military. I'm not going to repeat it." Alexandra stood and walked to the windows, looking out over the city with her arms crossed. For a long moment, she didn't speak. When she did, her voice carried a different quality, something more personal than professional. "My father built this company," she said. "Literally built it from 3 employees in a rented office to what it is today. He was brilliant, visionary, absolutely relentless." She paused. "He was also never home. I saw him maybe an hour a day during my entire childhood. Business always came first, always. When I was 16, I decided I hated him for it." Daniel stayed quiet, sensing she needed to finish this thought. "Now I'm running his company," Alexandra continued, "working the same hours he did, making the same choices. And I understand why he did it. When you're responsible for hundreds of employees and millions of dollars in value, the pressure never stops. There's always another crisis, another deal, another decision that can't wait." She turned back to face him. "But I also know what it cost. What it costs. I don't have children. I've never been married. I've built an empire, and I come home to an empty apartment every night and wonder if I'm just repeating his mistakes in a better suit." The honesty in that admission surprised Daniel. This wasn't CEO Alexandra Sterling, the woman who'd threatened to fire him in the basement. This was someone else, someone who'd climbed so high she could see exactly what she'd left behind. "I can't tell you what to do with your life," Alexandra said, "but I can tell you that I need someone like you in leadership. Someone who understands that success isn't just about the numbers on a spreadsheet. Someone who won't sacrifice everything that matters for everything that doesn't." She came back to her desk and met his eyes directly. "Take the position. Set your own boundaries. Make it work for your daughter. I'll support that because it's the kind of leadership this company actually needs, even if we've never practiced it before." Daniel looked at the folder again, at the salary that could change everything, at the job description that represented validation of every skill he'd spent years developing. "Can I think about it?" he asked. "Of course. Take the weekend. Talk to your daughter. She's part of this decision too." Alexandra extended her hand. "Whatever you decide, thank you again for Wednesday. You reminded me that the most important assets in any company aren't the systems. They're the people who know how to fix them." Daniel shook her hand, then left the office with the folder tucked under his arm and his mind spinning with possibilities and complications. In the elevator back down to the basement, he found himself thinking about the conversation in ways that had nothing to do with salary or job titles. Alexandra Sterling had just revealed something most executives would never admit: that success came with costs they didn't advertise, that climbing the ladder meant leaving things behind. She'd also suggested something radical: that maybe those costs weren't inevitable. that boundaries could exist even in positions of power. Daniel wasn't sure if he believed that, but he was curious enough to want to find out. The elevator doors opened on the basement level, and he stepped back into the familiar territory of concrete floors and machine noise, where the only thing that mattered was whether the equipment worked and the people depending on it could do their jobs. He had 48 hours to decide if he wanted to leave this world for something larger. 48 hours to figure out if ambition and fatherhood could actually coexist, or if that was just another kind of fantasy sold to people who wanted to believe they could have everything. The weekend stretched ahead with the weight of a decision that would reshape his daughter's future and his own. Whatever he chose, Daniel knew one thing for certain. The easy path would have been to say yes immediately, to grab the opportunity without thinking, which meant the right path probably required a lot more thought than that. Saturday morning, Daniel made pancakes. It was their weekend ritual, had been since Lily was old enough to crack eggs without getting shell fragments everywhere. She sat at their small kitchen table now, still in pajamas, working through a math problem set while he flipped batter on their ancient griddle. Their apartment wasn't much to look at. 2 bedrooms in a building that had been under renovation for 3 years running, with heating that worked inconsistently and water pressure that gave up entirely on cold mornings. But it was theirs. Familiar. Safe. The job offer sat on the counter where Daniel had left it last night, still in its folder, radiating possibility. "Dad, what's integrate mean?" Lily asked without looking up from her homework. "In math or in regular life?" "Math. It means finding the area under a curve, adding up infinite tiny pieces to get a total." She made a face. "Why would anyone need to do that? Engineers use it all the time, calculating load stress, measuring fluid flow, predicting system behavior." He slid 3 pancakes onto her plate. "Basically, any time you need to understand how small changes add up to big effects." Lily drowned her pancakes in syrup with the enthusiasm of someone who'd never heard of portion control. "Is that what you do at work? Calculate stuff?" "Sometimes. Mostly I fix things that other people calculated wrong." She laughed at that, and the sound made Daniel's chest tighten with the fierce protective love that had defined his life since the moment she was born. Every decision for the past 12 years had been measured against one question: what's best for Lily? Which made the conversation he needed to have right now both crucial and terrifying. "Hey, kiddo, I want to talk to you about something," he said, sitting down across from her with his own plate. She looked up, reading his tone. "Is this a serious talk?" "Maybe. Depends on what you think." "Okay." She set down her fork, giving him her full attention. Another trait she'd inherited from him, the ability to focus completely when something mattered. Daniel explained the job offer in terms she could understand. More money, which meant better apartment, college fund, nicer things. More responsibility, which meant harder work, occasional emergencies, less predictable schedule. A chance to use all the skills he developed over the years instead of just maintaining the basics. When he finished, Lily was quiet for a moment, processing. Then she asked the question that cut straight to the heart of it all. "Would you still be able to come to my competitions?" There it was. The real cost, the one that couldn't be calculated in salary figures or job descriptions. "Most of them," Daniel said honestly, "but probably not all of them. There would be times when work emergencies came up and I'd have to choose." "Like Wednesday?" "Like Wednesday." Lily thought about that, her face serious in a way that made her look older than 12. "But you made it Wednesday. You came even though it was hard." "I did, and I'll always try to make it. But this job would make it harder to guarantee." She picked up her fork and stabbed at a pancake, not eating it, just thinking. "Mrs. Chen's dad has a big job. He travels a lot. She says sometimes she doesn't see him for weeks." "I wouldn't travel," Daniel assured her. "This is local management. I'd be home every night." "But busy?" "Probably busier than now, yes." Lily was quiet again, and Daniel waited, letting her work through it. This was her decision as much as his. She was the reason for every choice he'd made since her mother died. Her stability, her happiness, her future, those were the only metrics that truly mattered. Finally, she looked up at him with eyes that were too wise for her age. "Do you want the job?" It was such a simple question, and the answer was more complicated than Daniel had let himself admit. "Part of me does," he said carefully. I miss using my brain the way I used to. Miss building things instead of just fixing them. Miss feeling like the work I do matters beyond just keeping the lights on. Your work does matter, Lily said fiercely. You saved that whole company Wednesday. That lady gave you a huge bonus because you matter. I know, but it's different. He struggled to find the right words. Imagine if you could only do robotics in secret, in your spare time, but never compete or show anyone what you built. That's kind of what the last 4 years have been like. I've been hiding what I can actually do because I needed a job that let me be your dad first. Understanding dawned in Lily's expression. And now you could do both? Maybe. I don't know. That's what I'm trying to figure out. She pushed her plate aside and came around the table to hug him, her skinny arms fierce around his neck. I think you should take it, she said into his shoulder. You're too smart to just fix toilets forever. Maintenance work isn't just fixing toilets. I know. Critical infrastructure, backbone of modern civilization. She pulled back and grinned. You've explained it like 1,000,000 times. But Dad, I saw you Wednesday night after the competition. You were so happy, not because of the bonus, because you got to solve something impossible and save everyone. You like that. You should get to do more of it. Daniel felt something unlock in his chest, a permission he hadn't realized he needed. You're sure, because I can't do this if it means I'm going to miss the important stuff. Your competitions, your school events, our Saturday pancakes, those aren't negotiable. Then tell her that, Lily said simply. Tell the CEO lady that you'll take the job, but you have rules. Like I'm your first priority and she has to deal with it. It doesn't really work that way in the corporate world, kiddo. Maybe it should. She grabbed her syrup-covered plate and headed for the sink. Besides, she seemed nice when she texted you after my competition. You saw that? I see everything. Lily rinsed her plate with the exaggerated confidence of someone proving they could handle additional responsibility. Take the job, Dad. We'll figure out the rest. We always do. Standing in their tiny kitchen with its outdated appliances and peeling linoleum, Daniel felt the future shifting. His daughter had just given him permission to want something for himself, to reach for ambition without guilt. Now he just had to figure out if Alexandra Sterling's promise of boundaries was real, or if it was the kind of thing executives said to get what they wanted and quietly ignored once you'd signed the contract. Monday morning, Daniel walked into Alexandra's office wearing his cleanest work shirt and carrying a handwritten list. She looked up from her computer and smiled. That was a quick weekend. I expected you to take longer. I'm efficient, Daniel said, sitting down without waiting to be asked. I want the job, but I have conditions. Alexandra's eyebrows rose slightly, but she gestured for him to continue. I'm listening. Daniel consulted his list. First, my daughter's schedule comes first. Robotics competitions, school events, important stuff. I need to be there. We can work around it for most things, but those dates are non-negotiable. Agreed. We'll build your management schedule around her calendar. Second, I need one of my current team members promoted to assistant director, someone who can handle emergencies when I'm not available. I'm thinking Sarah Chen. She's got the technical skills and the judgment. Alexandra made a note on her laptop. Sarah from the generator repair? She impressed me. Done. What else? Third, I want authority to rebuild the infrastructure team properly. We're understaffed by about 30%, and we're compensating with excessive overtime that's burning people out. I'll need budget to hire 3 more technicians and upgrade our equipment. Submit a proposal by the end of the month and I'll review it. Alexandra leaned forward. Anything else? Daniel hesitated, then decided if he was going to do this, he might as well do it completely. I want a clause in my contract that if the job starts requiring more than 50 hours a week on a regular basis, we revisit the arrangement. I'm not interested in a position that pretends to offer work-life balance, but actually demands I sacrifice my family. For a long moment, Alexandra just looked at him. Then she did something unexpected. She laughed. Not mockery, but genuine amusement tinged with something that might have been respect. You just negotiated better boundaries than I've ever managed for myself, she said. Most people in your position would have taken what I offered and hoped for the best. You're actually demanding I put it in writing. Words are easy, Daniel said. Contracts matter. If you mean what you said about supporting boundaries, prove it. Fair enough. Alexandra extended her hand across the desk. You have a deal. All conditions accepted. My lawyer will draw up the contract with your specifications. You start in 2 weeks. Gives you time to transition your current responsibilities and for HR to process everything. Daniel shook her hand, feeling the surreal weight of a decision that would reshape his entire life. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. This job is going to challenge you in ways that fixing generators never did. Managing people is harder than managing systems. I've led teams before. In the Army, that's different. Soldiers follow orders. Corporate employees follow incentives, politics, and their own agendas. You're going to find that technical problems have solutions. People problems just have complications. It was probably the most honest thing anyone had ever told him about management. I'll figure it out. I know you will. Alexandra stood, indicating the meeting was over. Welcome to leadership, Daniel. Try not to let it destroy your soul. He left her office with a mixture of excitement and trepidation, wondering if he'd just made the best decision of his life or a terrible mistake he wouldn't recognize until it was too late. In the elevator down, his phone buzzed with a text from Lily. Did you take it? He typed back, yes, you're stuck with a dad who has meetings now. Her response came immediately. That's so cool. Can I visit your new office? Once I have one, absolutely. The elevator doors opened on the basement level, and Daniel stepped out into the mechanical room where he'd spent the last 3 years of his life. Tony and Sarah were waiting by the coffee station, and from their expressions, they already knew. Marcus just told us, Tony said. Director of Infrastructure Operations. That's a hell of a promotion. It's a hell of a risk, Daniel corrected. But I'm taking it. And Sarah, you're coming with me. Assistant Director, 20% raise. You interested? Sarah's eyes went wide. Are you serious? Completely. I need someone I trust to handle technical emergencies, and you proved Wednesday you can think under pressure. What do you say? I say, when do I start? Sarah was practically vibrating with excitement. 2 weeks, same as me. Daniel turned to Tony. I want you as senior technical lead for the maintenance team. Not officially management, but more authority and better pay. Someone needs to keep the day-to-day operations running while Sarah and I are dealing with administrative stuff. Tony grinned. You're building yourself an empire down here. I'm building a functional infrastructure department. There's a difference. Daniel grabbed his thermos. But first, we've got 2 weeks to document everything I currently do so the next person doesn't have to figure it out from scratch. Let's get to work. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of training sessions, documentation, handover meetings, and administrative processing. Daniel discovered that transitioning from technician to director required approximately 17 different forms, 4 separate orientations, and more meetings about meetings than he'd attended in his entire previous career. He also discovered that Alexandra had been serious about the boundaries. When his contract arrived from legal, every condition he'd specified was included verbatim, along with language that protected his position if he needed to exercise those clauses. On his last day as a maintenance technician, the basement crew threw him an impromptu party featuring gas station cake and the kind of affectionate mockery that came from people who'd worked together in trenches. Marcus gave a surprisingly heartfelt speech about how Daniel had taught him to actually listen to the people who kept the building running. Sarah presented him with a framed photo of the improvised generator control system they'd built, labeled "When Impossible Was Just Tuesday." And Tony, gruff Tony who never admitted to sentiment, pulled him aside and said quietly, "Don't forget where you came from. Corporate world changes people. But you've got something they don't. You actually understand what matters. Keep that, and you'll do fine." Daniel promised he would try. The following Monday, he reported to his new office on the 45th floor. Not quite executive territory, but far above the basement where he'd started. The space was modest by corporate standards, but compared to the mechanical room, it felt absurd. Windows with actual views, a desk without grease stains, a door that closed. Sarah arrived minutes after him, looking equally disoriented by the sudden elevation. This is weird, right? It's not just me. It's extremely weird, Daniel agreed. But we'll get used to it. They spent the morning in meetings, budget reviews, team introductions, strategic planning sessions that felt like they'd been designed to use as many words as possible, to say very little. By lunch, Daniel's head was spinning with org charts and expense codes and stakeholder alignments. His phone buzzed with the text from Alexandra. "Surviving your first day?" He typed back, "Drowning in acronyms." Does everything need to be abbreviated? Corporate efficiency. We save 3 seconds per conversation and waste 30 minutes explaining what the acronyms mean to new people. That's why we have orientations. Speaking of which, leadership meeting tomorrow at 9 a.m., conference room. B. Don't be late. Daniel showed up Tuesday at 8:50, carrying a notebook and the vague anxiety of someone entering territory where he didn't yet know the rules. The conference room was already half full with senior directors and VPs, all of them looking comfortable in a space where Daniel felt like an obvious imposter. Alexandra arrived exactly at 9 and launched immediately into the agenda. The meeting covered quarterly projections, market analysis, strategic initiatives, all delivered in the rapid-fire shorthand of people who'd been having the same conversations for years. Daniel listened, taking notes, trying to map the political landscape. Who deferred to whom? Who interrupted? Who Alexandra listened to and who she politely ignored? Halfway through, she turned to him. Daniel, infrastructure update. How's the generator situation? Every eye in the room swiveled to him. Daniel felt the attention like pressure, but he'd briefed officers under worse circumstances. Permanent replacement parts arrived last week, he said. We fully restored the power command control system and tested all backup protocols. Generators running at optimal efficiency. We've also implemented additional security measures on the mechanical room access to prevent future sabotage attempts. Good. Any other infrastructure concerns we should be aware of? Daniel hesitated, then decided if he was going to be in leadership, he might as well lead. Actually, yes. I've been reviewing our preventive maintenance schedules across all major building systems. We're behind on HVAC servicing, our elevator inspection certifications are cutting it close, and we've got a chiller unit that's showing early warning signs of compressor failure. The CFO, a sharp-eyed man named Peterson, frowned. What's the budget impact? Roughly $80,000 for the immediate work. But if we don't address these issues now, we're looking at potential system failures that could cost 10 times that in emergency repairs and business disruption. $80,000 isn't in the current quarter budget, Peterson said. Then we should revise the budget, Daniel replied evenly. Infrastructure isn't optional. It's the foundation everything else depends on. The room went quiet. Several executives looked uncomfortable, as if Daniel had violated some unspoken protocol about questioning budget allocations. Alexandra broke the silence. He's right. Infrastructure failures cost us $400 million 2 weeks ago. We only got lucky because Daniel was here to improvise a fix. I don't want to depend on luck. She looked at Peterson. Find the $80,000. Present it as risk mitigation. The board will approve it. Peterson nodded tightly, and the meeting moved on. Afterward, as people filed out, Alexandra caught Daniel's arm. Good instincts. But next time, give me a heads up before you challenge the CFO in front of everyone. Internal politics matter. Noted, Daniel said. Though if the choice is between politics and preventing disasters, I'm going to pick preventing disasters. That's why I hired you, like Alexandra said. Just try to do it in a way that doesn't make unnecessary enemies. Peterson controls the budget you'll need to actually fix things. It was a lesson Daniel filed away. In the corporate world, being right wasn't enough. You had to be right in a way that didn't threaten the people whose support you needed. He was beginning to understand what Alexandra had meant about people problems being more complicated than technical ones. Over the next month, Daniel learned to navigate the strange ecosystem of corporate leadership, learned which battles to fight in public and which to handle quietly, learned that every decision had stakeholders who needed to be consulted, managed, convinced. But he also started to see results. The infrastructure team expanded, equipment upgrades were approved, preventive maintenance schedules were restructured to actually prevent problems, instead of just documenting them after they occurred. And through it all, he kept his promise to Lily, made it to her robotics practices, helped with homework, showed up for the regional competition where her team placed third and qualified for nationals. The morning after that competition, Alexandra called him into her office with an expression he couldn't quite read. I got a call from the board yesterday, she said without preamble. They want to meet you. Daniel felt his stomach tighten. Why? Because infrastructure performance metrics have improved measurably since you took over. System uptime is at 99.7%. Emergency repair costs are down 40%. Preventive maintenance compliance is actually where it's supposed to be for the first time in years. She smiled slightly. Turns out when you hire someone who actually understands the systems and give them authority to fix things, things actually get fixed. The board is impressed. That's just basic competence, Daniel said. In corporate terms, basic competence is revolutionary. Alexandra's smile faded. But I'm telling you this because board attention is a double-edged sword. They're going to expect you to maintain these results, possibly improve on them, and they're going to notice if you don't. Understood. Is it? Alexandra leaned forward. Because I've watched people burn out under board scrutiny. The pressure changes when you know powerful people are watching. Are you ready for that? Daniel thought about it honestly. Thought about the generator crisis and the improvised solution. Thought about the promises he'd made to his daughter and the boundaries he'd negotiated. I'm ready, he said. As long as the expectations don't require me to break the conditions we agreed to. I'm not sacrificing my daughter for performance metrics. Good, Alexandra said simply. Because the moment you start making that sacrifice, you'll lose the exact thing that makes you valuable, the perspective that some things matter more than corporate success. She stood and walked to her window, looking out over the city. The board meeting is next Thursday. Wear something that isn't work boots. And Daniel, don't let them intimidate you. They're just people who've spent too long in rooms like this, making decisions that affect people they never meet. Sometimes they need to be reminded what actually matters. Daniel left her office wondering if that last comment had been about him or about her. Either way, it felt like the stakes had just risen considerably. And somewhere in the back of his mind, a small voice wondered if he was already starting to become the kind of person who measured success by quarterly metrics instead of whether he made it home in time for dinner. He silenced that voice and got back to work. But it didn't go away entirely. The board meeting was scheduled for 10 o'clock Thursday morning, which gave Daniel exactly enough time to drop Lily at school, drive across the city in rush hour traffic, and arrive at Orion Tower with 3 minutes to spare. He'd bought a suit for the occasion, his first in 4 years. Standing in the department store dressing room, he'd felt like an imposter playing dress-up, but Lily had insisted he looked professional. Now, riding the elevator to the executive conference room where Orion's board of directors waited, he wondered if professional was enough. Sarah had texted him earlier. Good luck with the vultures. Remember, you're smarter than all of them combined. Tony's message had been more succinct. Don't let the bastards grind you down. The elevator doors opened onto the 68th floor. Alexandra was waiting in the reception area, also in a suit, hers probably costing more than Daniel's monthly salary used to be. She looked him over with an appraising eye. You clean up well, she said. Ready? As I'll ever be. Just be yourself. Answer their questions honestly. And remember, they're impressed with results, not corporate speak. You don't need to perform for them. She led him down the corridor to a conference room Daniel had never entered before. Through the glass walls, he could see 8 people seated around a massive table, each one radiating the particular confidence that came from having power and knowing how to use it. Alexandra opened the door and the conversation inside stopped immediately. Ladies and gentlemen, she said, this is Daniel Carter, our Director of Infrastructure Operations. Daniel, meet the board. What followed was a round of introductions Daniel knew he'd forget within minutes. Names and titles blurred together. Former CEOs, investment partners, industry veterans who'd built careers before Daniel was born. The only one who stuck was Richard Sterling, Alexandra's father, who sat at the head of the table with the territorial presence of someone who still considered this his kingdom despite having retired 5 years earlier. Mr. Carter, Richard said, his voice carrying the kind of authority that made it clear this wasn't really a greeting. We've been reviewing your performance metrics. Impressive improvement in a short time frame. Tell us how you achieved it. Daniel took the empty seat across from him, acutely aware that every eye in the room was measuring him against some invisible standard. I started by actually looking at the systems instead of just reading reports about them. Most of the problems we were facing came from deferred maintenance and understaffing. The solutions weren't complicated. Hire enough people to do the work properly, invest in equipment before it fails, and treat infrastructure as a priority instead of an afterthought. That requires budget allocation, said a woman to Richard's left, Patricia Chen, the CFO of a manufacturing conglomerate, and no relation to either David or Sarah. How did you justify the additional expenditure? By calculating the cost of not doing it, Daniel replied. Every system failure creates cascading expenses: emergency repairs, business disruption, reputation damage. The generator crisis 2 months ago nearly cost us $400 million. We fixed it for essentially nothing, but we got lucky. Luck isn't a business strategy. Proper maintenance is. One of the other board members, a venture capitalist named Morrison, leaned forward. You have an interesting background, Mr. Carter. Military engineering, then private sector, then several years working well below your capability level. Why the downshift? Here it was. The question Daniel had known would come. The one that revealed whether these people understood anything beyond quarterly returns. My wife died 4 years ago, he said simply. I had a daughter who needed a parent more than she needed expensive vacations. Maintenance work gave me predictable hours and flexibility. That mattered more than career advancement. And now? Morrison pressed. What changed? Daniel glanced at Alexandra, who was watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. My daughter got older, more independent, and I realized I could maybe do both. Be present for her and use my skills for something that matters. So when Ms. Sterling offered me this position, I took it, with conditions that protect my priorities. Conditions? Richard's eyebrow rose. What kind of conditions? Family commitments come first. Reasonable work hours. Authority to build a functional team instead of maintaining an understaffed one. Basic boundaries that let me do the job well without sacrificing the things that matter. The room went very quiet. Several board members exchanged glances. Richard's expression had shifted into something Daniel couldn't identify. Not quite disapproval, but definitely not approval either. That's an unusual negotiating position for someone in your situation, Richard said carefully. Most people would have simply accepted what was offered and considered themselves fortunate. Most people don't know what they're worth, Daniel replied. He could feel the moment balanced on an edge, could sense that his next words would define how this entire relationship proceeded. I saved this company $400 million with spare parts and improvisation. I've improved infrastructure performance across every metric that matters, and I did it while maintaining the boundaries that let me be a good father. That's not luck. That's competence plus priorities. I'm not going to apologize for having both. For a long moment, Richard just stared at him. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled, a quick, sharp expression that transformed his face. Alexandra said you were different. I see what she meant. He turned to the rest of the board. Any other questions for Mr. Carter? Patricia Chen spoke up. The infrastructure improvements are impressive, but they're also expensive. How do you plan to maintain these performance levels without continually increasing budget allocations? By shifting from reactive to preventive maintenance, Daniel said. Right now, we're still catching up on years of deferred work. Once we've addressed the backlog, costs will stabilize. We'll be replacing components on schedule instead of in crisis mode, which is significantly cheaper. The initial investment is higher, but the long-term savings are substantial. And if budget constraints require cuts? Asked another board member, a retired executive named Williams. Where would you reduce expenditure without compromising performance? It was a trap question, the kind designed to make him choose between impossible options. Daniel had seen similar tactics in military briefings from officers who cared more about testing subordinates than finding solutions. I wouldn't, he said bluntly. Infrastructure isn't discretionary. You can't cut it without accepting performance degradation. That's like asking which leg you want to amputate to save money on shoes. If budget cuts are necessary, they should come from areas that won't compromise the building's basic functionality. But infrastructure? That's non-negotiable. Williams frowned. Everything's negotiable in business, Mr. Carter. Not the foundation that keeps the building standing, Daniel countered. You can negotiate the furniture, the artwork, the office amenities, but the electrical systems, the climate control, the structural integrity, those aren't optional. They're the difference between a functional workplace and an expensive lawsuit waiting to happen. Alexandra spoke for the first time since the introductions, which is exactly why we needed someone in this position who understands that distinction. Too many infrastructure directors treat their department like a cost center to be minimized. Daniel treats it like what it actually is, the critical foundation everything else depends on. Richard studied his daughter for a moment, something passing between them that Daniel couldn't interpret. Then he turned back to Daniel. You've made your point, and your results speak for themselves. Continue what you're doing, but understand that board scrutiny comes with expectations. We'll be watching your metrics closely. I'd expect nothing less, Daniel said. The meeting continued for another 30 minutes, covering other business that didn't involve Daniel directly. He sat quietly, listening to discussions about market expansion and strategic partnerships, getting a glimpse into the machinery that drove corporate decision-making at the highest levels. Finally, Richard adjourned the meeting. Board members filed out, several of them nodding to Daniel as they passed. Patricia Chen stopped briefly. "You have spine," she said quietly. "That's rare at your level. Don't lose it as you climb higher. The corporate world will try to sand down anyone who sticks out." Then she was gone, leaving Daniel alone with Alexandra and her father. Richard stood and buttoned his suit jacket with the precise movements of someone who'd performed the gesture 10,000 times. "Walk with me, Mr. Carter." It wasn't really a request. Daniel followed him out of the conference room, leaving Alexandra behind with an expression that suggested this wasn't part of the planned agenda. Richard led him to a smaller office down the hall, clearly his personal space despite no longer being CEO, decorated with awards and photos chronicling Orion's 70-year history. He gestured for Daniel to sit, then settled into the chair behind the desk with the ease of someone reclaiming familiar territory. "I'm going to be direct with you," Richard said. "My daughter is brilliant, possibly more capable than I ever was, but she has a weakness I've been trying to address for years." "Sir?" Daniel wasn't sure where this was going. "She thinks corporate success and personal fulfillment can coexist, that you can build an empire without sacrifice, that boundaries are something other than obstacles to overcome." Richard's gaze was sharp, analytical. "You're reinforcing that delusion." Daniel felt his jaw tighten. "With respect, Mr. Sterling, I don't think wanting a life outside of work is a delusion." "Then you don't understand what it takes to run a company like Orion. The competitors who want to destroy you, the economic forces that don't care about your daughter's robotics competition, the constant pressure to perform or be replaced." Richard leaned forward. "I built this company by sacrificing everything else. Marriages, relationships, time with my children. That's the price of success at this level. Anyone who tells you otherwise is lying or hasn't climbed high enough to understand. Or maybe they've climbed high enough to see that the view isn't worth what you gave up to get there," Daniel said quietly. Richard's expression hardened. "You've been in management for 2 months. Don't presume to lecture me about perspective." "I'm not lecturing. I'm disagreeing. There's a difference." Daniel met the older man's eyes steadily. "You built something impressive, but you also raised a daughter who barely speaks to you and spends her nights alone in an apartment wondering if she's repeating your mistakes. She told me that herself. Is that really the legacy you wanted?" For a moment, he thought Richard might explode. The older man's face went rigid, his hands clenching on the armrests of his chair. Then slowly, something in his expression shifted. Not softening exactly, but acknowledging. "She told you that?" Richard's voice was quieter now. "She did. In the context of explaining why she was willing to let me set boundaries for this job. Because she understands that success without balance isn't actually success. It's just expensive emptiness." Richard was silent for a long moment, staring at something beyond Daniel, beyond the office, perhaps beyond the decades of choices that had brought him here. When he spoke again, his voice carried a weight that hadn't been there before. "I haven't had dinner with my daughter in 6 months. Maybe longer. We email about business matters and occasionally speak at board meetings, but actual conversation? The kind where we talk about things that matter?" He shook his head. "I don't even know if she'd accept an invitation if I offered one." Daniel thought about Lily, about their Saturday morning pancakes and their evening homework sessions. Thought about how quickly 12 years had passed and how little time he'd actually have left before she grew up and moved on to her own life. "She might surprise you," he said. "People generally want connection with their parents, even when the relationship is complicated." "Is that military wisdom or personal experience?" "Both. I spent 8 years following orders from officers who thought leadership meant distance and authority. The best ones were the ones who remembered that soldiers were people first and resources second. Same principle applies to family, probably more." Richard studied him with renewed interest, as if seeing him clearly for the first time. You're not what I expected when Alexandra told me she was promoting a maintenance technician. I get that a lot. I imagine you do. Richard stood, signaling the conversation was ending. Continue what you're doing, Mr. Carter, but understand something. The moment your boundaries start compromising company performance, this board will remove you. We don't keep people for potential, only for results. Understood, Daniel said, but I don't think boundaries and results are mutually exclusive. I think that's just what people tell themselves to justify bad choices. Richard almost smiled at that. You're either very brave or very foolish. Probably both, Daniel admitted. He left Richard's office and found Alexandra waiting in the corridor, her expression hovering somewhere between concern and curiosity. What did he want? She asked. To warn me that I'm a bad influence on you, Daniel said. Apparently teaching you that work-life balance is possible constitutes corporate heresy. Alexandra's laugh was short and bitter. That sounds like him. Did he threaten to fire you? Only if my performance drops, which it won't. They walked back toward the main elevator bank, and Daniel could feel Alexandra wrestling with something unspoken. Finally, as they waited for the elevator to arrive, she said quietly, He's not wrong about sacrifice, you know. Leadership at this level does require giving things up. Time, relationships, sometimes basic human connection. I've accepted that. Have you? Daniel asked. Or have you just convinced yourself you don't have a choice? The elevator arrived, and they stepped inside. Alexandra pressed this button for the 45th floor, then turned to face him directly. You've been in management for 2 months, she said, echoing her father's words. Wait until you've done this for 10 years, 20. Wait until the pressure never stops and every decision you make affects hundreds of lives. Then tell me about choices. I spent 8 years in war zones making decisions that got people killed or kept them alive, Daniel replied. The pressure doesn't scare me. What scares me is becoming someone who uses pressure as an excuse to abandon the things that make life worth living. The elevator doors opened on the 45th floor. Alexandra stepped out, then paused and looked back at him. My father wants to have dinner with me, she said. First time in 6 months. He texted while you two were talking. I think you actually got through to him. Are you going to accept? I don't know. Part of me thinks it's a trap, that he's going to spend the entire meal explaining why I'm doing everything wrong. Her expression was vulnerable in a way Daniel had never seen before. What would you do? Daniel thought about Richard Sterling's expression when he'd admitted he barely spoke to his daughter. Thought about regret and the slow accumulation of missed opportunities. I'd accept, he said. People don't change easily. If he's trying, even badly, that's worth acknowledging. Besides, worst case scenario, you get a free meal and confirmation that your father is still impossible. Best case, maybe you start rebuilding something. Alexandra nodded slowly. When did you become my therapist in addition to my infrastructure director? It's part of the job description. Didn't you read the fine print? She actually smiled at that. A real smile, not the professional mask she usually wore. Thank you, Daniel. For today. For standing up to the board. For whatever you said to my father that made him actually think about something besides quarterly returns. Any time, Daniel said. Then, because the moment felt honest enough for honesty, he added, For what it's worth, I think you're doing better than you give yourself credit for. You hired someone who challenged your assumptions. You supported boundaries most CEOs would never allow. That takes courage. Or desperation, Alexandra said. Maybe I'm just tired of becoming my father. Those aren't mutually exclusive. The elevator doors started to close, and Daniel caught them, stepping back into the corridor. One more thing, Alexandra said. The board was impressed, which means they're going to start asking you to present at more meetings, maybe even invite you to corporate events. That's good for your career, but it's also dangerous. The higher you climb, the more people will want from you. Don't let them take more than you're willing to give. I won't, Daniel promised. He spent the rest of the day buried in work, reviewing maintenance schedules, approving equipment purchases, mediating a dispute between 2 technicians about proper protocol for refrigerant handling. Normal problems with normal solutions, a welcome relief after the intensity of the board meeting. At 5:30, his phone alarm reminded him that Lily had a project due tomorrow and needed help with research. He shut down his computer, grabbed his jacket, and headed for the elevator. Sarah caught him in the hallway. How'd the board meeting go? I'm still employed, so better than expected. That's the spirit? Low standards, high achievement? She fell into step beside him. Hey, speaking of achievement, I've been looking at the chiller unit you flagged last month. The compressor's showing more degradation than we thought. We might need to replace the whole system. How much? 200,000, give or take. Daniel whistled. That'll require board approval. Can it wait until next quarter? Maybe. But if it fails during summer when we're running maximum cooling load, we're looking at building-wide climate control loss and potential server damage. Could cost us millions. It was the exact kind of decision Daniel had known would come, the choice between fiscal caution and operational necessity, the kind of choice that defined what kind of leader he would become. Put together a detailed report with failure probability analysis and cost comparison scenarios, he said. I'll present it to Alexandra tomorrow. If the numbers support replacement, we'll push for emergency approval. Sarah nodded, already making notes on her tablet. You're getting good at this corporate thing? I'm getting good at translating engineering reality into language executives understand. There's a difference. Is there, though? Daniel laughed. Ask me in a year. He made it home by 6:15, found Lily already deep into research about renewable energy systems for her environmental science project. They worked together at the kitchen table, Daniel helping her understand electrical grid concepts, while she typed notes with the focused intensity she brought to everything she cared about. At one point, she looked up from her laptop and asked, Dad, do you like your new job? The question caught him off guard with its directness. Most of the time. Why? You seem different. Not bad different, just busier, more distracted. Daniel set down the article he'd been reading and gave her his full attention. Am I being distracted right now? Not present enough? No, you're here. You always show up when you promise. I just wonder if you're happy or just doing it because the money's good. It was the kind of question that deserved an honest answer. I think I'm figuring out how to be happy in a different way than I was before. The work challenges me, uses my brain in ways maintenance didn't, but it's also harder to turn off, harder to leave at the office. Is that good or bad? Both, Daniel admitted. It's good because I'm building something that matters. Bad because I have to be careful. It doesn't take over everything else. That's why the boundaries are important. Why I still make it to your competitions and help with your homework and make pancakes on Saturdays. Lily nodded slowly, processing this. Mom used to say that work was just what you did to pay for life, that the real stuff happened when you came home. Daniel felt his throat tighten. His wife had said exactly that many times, usually while trying to convince him to take fewer deployments, to value presence over promotion. She was right, he said quietly. Work matters, but it's not the point. You're the point. These moments are the point. I'm not going to forget that. Okay, Lily went back to her typing, apparently satisfied. Then, without looking up, she added, I'm glad you took the job, though. You seem more like yourself, like the person you were before Mom died and everything got small. That observation hit Daniel harder than any board meeting or executive challenge. Because she was right. For 4 years, he'd been playing it safe, staying small, choosing security over ambition because grief and responsibility had made risk feel impossible. Alexandra's job offer hadn't just given him a promotion. It had given him permission to become himself again, the person who solved impossible problems and built things that mattered, as long as he could do it without losing sight of what mattered most. Later that night, after Lily had gone to bed, Daniel sat at the kitchen table and drafted the proposal for the chiller replacement. Ran the numbers, built the risk assessment, translated technical necessity into business justification. His phone buzzed with the text from Alexandra. Accepted dinner with my father, Saturday night, trying not to panic. He typed back, You'll be fine. Just remember he's more scared than you are. How do you figure? Because you're proof that his philosophy might be wrong. That's terrifying for someone who built their entire identity around it. There was a long pause before her next message. Sometimes I forget you're not just good with generators. Thank you. Anytime. Daniel set down the phone and returned to the proposal, working until the numbers made sense and the argument was airtight. When he finally shut his laptop at 11:30, he felt the familiar satisfaction of a problem well solved, combined with the growing awareness that these problems never really ended. They just became more complex. The next morning, he presented the chiller replacement proposal to Alexandra. She reviewed it with the same analytical intensity she brought to everything, asking sharp questions about failure probabilities and timeline constraints. "This is solid work," she said finally. "I'll take it to the Finance Committee for emergency approval. Peterson won't like it. He's already annoyed about your infrastructure budget increases. But the risk analysis supports your recommendation. Will it be approved?" "Probably. The board's paying attention to infrastructure now, thanks to your performance improvements. They don't want to lose momentum by ignoring legitimate safety concerns." She closed the laptop and leaned back. "You're making enemies, though. Peterson's been complaining that you don't respect budget constraints. Morrison thinks you're too inflexible. A few others are grumbling about the maintenance technician who thinks he can tell executives how to run the company." "Should I care?" Daniel asked. "Only if you want to keep advancing. Corporate politics aren't optional at your level. People with grudges can sabotage your projects, block your budget requests, poison your reputation. So what do you suggest?" Alexandra considered this. "Build alliances. Find executives whose priorities align with yours and cultivate those relationships. Acknowledge Peterson's budget concerns publicly even when you disagree privately. Show Morrison you could be flexible on things that don't matter while holding firm on things that do." She paused. "Basically, learn to play the game without losing yourself in it." "That sounds exhausting." "It is. Welcome to leadership." Her phone buzzed and she glanced at it, then smiled slightly. "My father just confirmed Saturday, 7 o'clock at Marcello's. Apparently he's trying to impress me with expensive Italian food. That's progress. Or manipulation. Time will tell." She set down the phone. "Either way, it's happening because you challenged him. So thank you, I think." Daniel left her office with the growing sense that he'd somehow become tangled in dynamics that went far beyond infrastructure management. His job was supposed to be about keeping the building running. Instead, he found himself mediating between a CEO and her father, navigating corporate politics he barely understood, and trying to prove that boundaries and success could coexist, all while making sure he was home in time to help Lily with her science project. The following week brought the Emergency Finance Committee meeting about the chiller replacement. Daniel presented his analysis to a room full of executives who clearly resented having their schedules disrupted for maintenance concerns. Peterson challenged every assumption, every cost projection, every timeline estimate. Morrison questioned whether the risk was really significant enough to justify immediate action. Two other executives suggested waiting until the next budget cycle to address the issue properly. Daniel held his ground, walked them through the engineering reality step by step, translated technical risk into language they understood, potential liability, business disruption, regulatory compliance issues. In the end, they approved it. Barely, with conditions about competitive bidding and timeline constraints that would make the project harder than it needed to be. But it was approved. Walking out of that meeting, Daniel felt both victorious and exhausted. He'd won the battle. But he could already see the war stretching ahead, a constant fight to prioritize infrastructure against executives who viewed it as an expense rather than an investment. Sarah was waiting in his office when he returned. "Well?" "Approved. With about 15 additional hoops to jump through, but approved. That's a win. Feels more like a compromise." "Welcome to management," Sarah said, echoing Alexandra's earlier words, "where victory just means you lost less than you could have." Daniel laughed despite himself. "How's the day-to-day looking?" "Smooth. Tony's got the maintenance crew running like a machine. No emergencies, no crisis calls, just normal operational excellence." "That's almost suspicious." "Right? I keep waiting for something to explode." Sarah settled into the chair across from his desk. "But seriously, things are good. Better than they've been in years. The team's got confidence because they know someone's actually fighting for resources and support. That matters more than you probably realize." It mattered to Daniel, too, in ways he was still learning to articulate. This wasn't just about keeping systems running anymore. It was about building something, a department, a culture, a way of working that valued both competence and humanity. Whether that could survive in the corporate environment remained to be seen. But for now, in this moment, it was working. And that would have to be enough. Saturday arrived with the kind of spring weather that made the city feel almost optimistic. Daniel spent the morning with Lily at the regional robotics finals, watching her team navigate the competition with the methodical precision she'd inherited from him and the creative problem-solving that was entirely her own. Her robot didn't win, placed fourth out of 23 teams, but the way her face lit up when the judges praised her innovative gripper design made Daniel's chest ache with pride. This was what mattered. Not board meetings or budget battles, but being present for moments like this. Afterward, over celebratory pizza that Lily insisted tasted better because they'd earned it, his phone buzzed with a text from Alexandra. The message was short. "Dinner with my father in 3 hours. Convince me this isn't a terrible idea." Daniel typed back, "It's probably a terrible idea. Do it anyway. Best decisions usually are." Her response came immediately. "That's not reassuring. Not supposed to be. It's supposed to be honest." There was a pause, then, "Thank you, I think." Lily looked up from her pizza. "Who are you texting?" "My boss. She's having dinner with her father tonight, and she's nervous about it." "Why would she be nervous about dinner with her dad? You and I have dinner every night." "Their relationship is complicated. They don't talk much." Lily frowned, processing this with the seriousness she brought to problems she didn't fully understand. "That's sad. Doesn't she know how lucky she is to have a dad?" The question hit Daniel harder than Lily probably intended. She'd been 8 when her mother died, old enough to remember, young enough that the grief had reshaped her understanding of what family meant. She knew, in ways most 12-year-olds didn't, that parents weren't guaranteed. "I think she's starting to figure that out," Daniel said quietly. "Sometimes people need to almost lose something before they understand its value." "That's dumb," Lily declared. "You should just know." "You're absolutely right, but people are complicated. We make mistakes, build walls, convince ourselves we don't need things we actually do. Takes someone pointing it out sometimes. Like you pointing it out to your boss's dad?" "Something like that." Lily nodded, satisfied with this explanation, and returned to her pizza. Daniel watched her for a moment, this fierce, brilliant person he'd somehow been trusted to raise, and felt the familiar gratitude mixed with terror that came with single parenthood. Every decision he made rippled through her life. Every choice about work or boundaries or priorities shaped who she would become. No pressure. His phone buzzed again. This time it was Tony. "Heads up, got a call from building security. Someone's been accessing the mechanical areas after hours. Might be nothing, but thought you should know." Daniel's protective instincts kicked in immediately. After the sabotage 2 months ago, any unusual activity in the infrastructure zone set off alarms. He typed back, "When?" "Last 3 nights. Always between midnight and 2 a.m. Badge access shows maintenance credentials, but security can't match the swipes to specific personnel. Pull the camera footage. I want to know who it is and what they're doing. Already on it. We'll send you files tonight." Daniel set down his phone, his mind already shifting into problem-solving mode. Could be innocent. A night shift worker doing legitimate repairs. Could be something else. Either way, he needed to know. "Dad?" Lily's voice pulled him back. "You okay? You got that look." "What look?" "The one you get when you're fixing something in your head. Like the rest of the world disappears and it's just you and the problem." Daniel smiled despite the tension. "Just work stuff. Nothing urgent. How about we get ice cream before heading home?" "Really? Ice cream after pizza?" "You qualified for regionals. That deserves ice cream." Lily's grin was worth whatever stomach ache would follow. They spent the rest of the afternoon in the kind of easy companionship that made all the complicated parts of Daniel's life feel manageable. Walked through the park near their apartment, talked about her upcoming science fair project, debated whether her robot needed a better name than Grabber 3000. By the time they got home, Daniel's phone had 3 new messages from Tony with attached security footage. He waited until Lily was settled in her room working on homework, then opened the files on his laptop. The footage showed a figure in maintenance coveralls entering the mechanical room at 12:47 a.m., moving with the deliberate purpose of someone who knew exactly where they were going. The person avoided camera angles skillfully, enough to suggest familiarity with the security setup. In the second clip, taken the following night, the same figure accessed the electrical substation for nearly 40 minutes. The timestamp showed 1:15 a.m. to 1:53 a.m. The third clip was from last night. This time, the person went directly to the backup generator room, the same space where Daniel had performed the emergency repair 2 months earlier. Daniel felt ice forming in his gut. This wasn't random exploration. This was systematic reconnaissance. Someone was studying Orion's infrastructure with concerning thoroughness. He called Tony immediately. "You saw the footage?" Tony asked without preamble. "Yeah, that's not maintenance activity. That's someone planning something." "That's what I thought. Security's trying to trace the badge access, but it's showing as a generic maintenance credential. Someone either cloned a badge or hacked the system." "What did they access in the generator room?" "Can't tell from the cameras, but they were at the control panel for about 20 minutes. The same control panel Daniel had jury-rigged with Arduino and Prayer. The system they'd eventually replaced with proper components, but which still represented a potential vulnerability if someone knew what they were looking for. "I'm coming in," Daniel said, already grabbing his jacket. "Now, it's Saturday evening." "Someone's casing our infrastructure, Tony. I'm not waiting until Monday to figure out why." He stuck his head into Lily's room. "Hey, kiddo, I need to run into the office for a couple hours. Emergency situation. You okay here?" Lily looked up from her homework with the resigned expression of someone who'd learned that emergencies didn't follow convenient schedules. "Is it serious?" "Maybe. Probably just precautionary. I'll be back before bedtime." "Promise?" "Promise. Mrs. Chen next door has my number if you need anything." "I know, Dad. I'm 12, not 6. I can handle 2 hours alone." Daniel kissed the top of her head anyway. "Order whatever you want for dinner. My credit card's on the counter." "Even Thai food?" "Even Thai food. Just don't tell your dentist about the dessert." The drive to Orion Tower took 30 minutes in light weekend traffic. Daniel spent the entire time running scenarios. Could be corporate espionage, a competitor studying their systems to find vulnerabilities. Could be a disgruntled employee planning sabotage. Could be something else entirely. Whatever it was, it felt wrong. Tony and Sarah were already in the security office when Daniel arrived, huddled around multiple monitors showing live feeds from throughout the building. The weekend security supervisor, a retired police officer named Martinez, was scrolling through access logs with the methodical patience of someone who'd spent decades investigating crimes. "Anything new?" Daniel asked. Martinez gestured to his screen. "Badge access shows maintenance authorization, but the specific credential ID doesn't match any active employee. It's a ghost account. Exists in the system but not assigned to a real person." "How is that possible?" "Someone with administrative access created it, which means either IT or someone high enough in management to authorize system changes." Sarah was pulling up infrastructure schematics on her tablet. "If I wanted to disable this building's critical systems, I'd go after 3 things: backup power, climate control, and network infrastructure. Those 3 together would create chaos without causing permanent damage. Perfect for corporate sabotage." "And they've accessed all 3 areas," Tony added, pointing to the security log. "Generator room, HVAC control station, and the server room network junction. They're mapping our vulnerabilities." Daniel felt the pieces clicking together with sickening clarity. They're planning another attack, bigger than the generator sabotage. Something coordinated. "But why?" Martinez asked. "What's the endgame?" "Damage Orion's reputation, disrupt operations, maybe tank our stock price or sabotage a specific business deal." Daniel turned to Sarah. "What do we have coming up that would be catastrophically affected by infrastructure failure?" Sarah pulled up the corporate calendar on her tablet. "Singapore implementation starts in 2 weeks. We're installing our energy management system across their entire commercial portfolio. It's a showcase project. If we succeed, it opens up the entire Asian market. If we fail, we lose credibility and probably the contract," Daniel finished. $400 million goes away and takes our reputation with it. "So someone wants to make sure we fail," Tony said. "Question is who and how do we stop them?" Daniel studied the security footage again, watching the figure move through the mechanical spaces with practiced efficiency. Something about the movement pattern nagged at him, a familiarity he couldn't quite place. "We need to catch them in the act," he said. "Tonight, if possible. They've established a pattern, accessing systems between midnight and 2 a.m. We set up surveillance, wait for them to show up, and identify them directly." Martinez nodded. "I can coordinate with my team. We'll position officers at key access points, keep them out of camera view. When your ghost shows up, we'll have them." "I want to be there," Daniel said. "In the generator room. If they're planning to sabotage it again, I need to see what they're doing." That could be dangerous, Sarah pointed out. If they're willing to commit corporate sabotage, they might not react well to being caught. Which is why Martinez's team will be there as backup. But I need to understand the technical aspect, what they're planning, how they're planning to do it. That's information we'll need to prevent future attempts. They spent the next hour setting up the surveillance operation. Martinez positioned his security officers at strategic points throughout the basement level. Sarah configured the camera system to record at higher resolution and alert them to any movement in the target areas. Tony assembled a toolkit of equipment they might need if technical intervention became necessary. At 11:30, they took their positions. Daniel settled into a utility closet adjacent to the generator room with a clear view of the entrance. The space was cramped and smelled of cleaning supplies, but the angle was perfect. The hours crawled past with agonizing slowness. Midnight came and went, and Daniel's phone showed messages from Lily, goodnight texts and a photo of her Thai food dinner spread that looked like she'd ordered enough for 3 people. He smiled and texted back, "Save me some pad Thai. Love you too. Catch the bad guy." At 12:43 a.m., Martinez's voice crackled through Daniel's earpiece. "Movement on sublevel 2. Someone just accessed the stairwell." Daniel's pulse quickened. He watched through the crack in the closet door as the corridor lights flickered slightly, a power fluctuation so brief most people would miss it. But Daniel noticed. Someone was already manipulating the electrical systems. Footsteps echoed in the concrete hallway. Then a figure appeared, dressed in maintenance coveralls, moving with confident purpose toward the generator room. They swiped the cloned badge and the door clicked open. Daniel waited until the person was fully inside, then keyed his mic. "Target's in the generator room. I'm moving in." "Wait for backup." Martinez started, but Daniel was already out of the closet. He entered the generator room silently, staying in the shadows near the entrance. The figure stood at the control panel, back turned, working on something with focused intensity. In the dim emergency lighting, Daniel could see they were connecting a device to the generator's diagnostic port, something small and electronic that definitely didn't belong there. "Step away from the equipment," Daniel said, his voice calm and commanding in the way the army had trained him. The figure spun around, and in the backwash of their flashlight, Daniel finally saw their face. It was Marcus Webb. For a moment, they just stared at each other across the generator room. Marcus's expression cycled through surprise, fear, and something that might have been resignation. "Daniel," Marcus said quietly, "I was hoping it wouldn't be you." "What are you doing, Marcus?" "What I have to do." Marcus's hand moved toward the device he'd been installing, and Daniel saw his finger hovering over what looked like an activation switch. "Don't," Daniel warned, taking a step forward. "Whatever you're planning, this isn't the answer." "You don't understand. You've been here 2 months? You don't know what this company really is, what they've done." Martinez's voice crackled in Daniel's earpiece. "Backup's 30 seconds out." Daniel kept his attention on Marcus, reading the desperation in his former colleague's posture. This wasn't corporate espionage. This was personal. "Then explain it to me," Daniel said, keeping his voice level. "Help me understand." Marcus laughed bitterly. "They're shutting down the Denver division. 200 employees losing their jobs so Orion can maximize profit margins for the Singapore expansion. My brother works in Denver. He's got 3 kids and a mortgage. Where's he supposed to go?" "That's not a reason to sabotage the company." "Isn't it? They're sacrificing people for profit. I'm just returning the favor. If the Singapore project fails, maybe they'll reconsider the cuts. Maybe 200 families get to keep their livelihoods." Daniel understood the logic even as he recognized its fatal flaw. Where the project fails, the company loses credibility, and even more people lose their jobs, including everyone in this building, including you. "I don't care anymore," Marcus said, and Daniel heard the truth in it. "I'm tired of watching corporate executives treat people like resources to be optimized, tired of pretending quarterly earnings matter more than human lives. If this is what it takes to make them pay attention—" "It won't work," Daniel interrupted. "All you'll do is confirm their worst assumptions, that people are unreliable, that systems matter more than human judgment. You'll give them justification for every ruthless decision they make." Marcus's hand trembled over the activation switch. "Then what should I do? Just accept it? Watch my brother lose everything while Sterling buys another vacation home?" "No," Daniel said firmly. You fight it the right way. Document the decision-making process. Get employee testimony. Take it to the board, to the press if necessary. Show them that loyalty matters, that people matter, but not like this. Not with sabotage that proves you're exactly as unreliable as they assume. Security officers appeared in the doorway behind Daniel, but he held up a hand, keeping them back. This moment balanced on an edge. One wrong move and Marcus would trigger whatever he'd planted in the generator systems. Marcus, Daniel said quietly, I know you're angry. I know the company's decision feels cruel and inhuman. You're probably right about that, but this path only destroys you and makes things worse for everyone you're trying to help. Walk away now. Disconnect that device. We'll figure out a better solution together. Why would you help me? I was about to sabotage everything you've built. Because I understand what it's like to watch people you care about get hurt by systems that don't value them. And because revenge isn't justice, it's just more pain in a different direction. For a long moment, Marcus stood frozen, his hand still hovering over the device. Daniel could see the war playing out in his expression, anger and loyalty fighting against reason and fear. Finally, slowly, Marcus's hand dropped to his side. I don't know how to fix this. Neither do I, Daniel admitted. But we'll start by not making it worse. Martinez and his team moved in carefully, securing Marcus and removing the device from the generator control system. Daniel examined it briefly, a sophisticated timer system designed to trigger a coordinated shutdown of multiple building systems simultaneously. Exactly the kind of chaos that would have destroyed Orion's credibility during the Singapore implementation. Marcus didn't resist as security escorted him out. At the doorway, he looked back at Daniel with an expression of exhausted defeat. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. You didn't deserve to be caught in the middle of this. None of us do, Daniel said. That's the problem with collateral damage. It doesn't care who deserves what. After they left, Daniel stood alone in the generator room, staring at the machine that had become the focal point of so much conflict. 2 months ago, he'd saved this company by fixing this exact system. Tonight, he'd saved it again by stopping someone from destroying it. But the victory felt hollow. Because Marcus wasn't wrong about the fundamental injustice. Orion was sacrificing people for profit, and Daniel had just helped protect the system that made those decisions. His phone rang, Alexandra's number. Martinez called me, she said without preamble. Marcus Webb. I can't believe it. He's been with the company for 8 years. He was trying to save his brother's job, Daniel said. The Denver closure. Did you know about that? There was a pause. It's been under discussion for 2 months. The board approved it last week. We're announcing it Monday. 200 people, Alexandra. 200 families losing their income so you can optimize margins. It's not that simple, isn't it? From where I'm standing, it looks exactly that simple. You're choosing profit over people, just like Marcus said. Daniel? Her voice was sharp now, defensive. You don't understand the full financial picture. Denver's been underperforming for 3 years. We've tried restructuring, retraining, market repositioning. Nothing's worked. We either close that division or risk the entire company's stability. And there's no middle ground? No option that doesn't involve destroying 200 lives? If there was, we would have found it. Do you think I want this? Do you think the board enjoys making these decisions? Daniel thought about Richard Sterling's admission that corporate success required sacrifice, thought about the choice between individual compassion and systemic stability, thought about how easy it was to rationalize cruelty when the numbers supported it. I think you've convinced yourself there's no choice, he said finally, because accepting that there might be alternatives would mean admitting you chose profit anyway. That's harder to live with. Alexandra was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was different, softer, more uncertain. What would you have me do? I don't know. That's above my pay grade. But I know that if I were one of those 200 people, I'd want someone to at least try to find another way. Even if it failed. At least then I'd know someone cared enough to try. I'll think about it, Alexandra said, though Daniel couldn't tell if she meant it or if she was just ending the conversation. Thank you for stopping Marcus, and for not letting him destroy everything. I didn't do it for the company, Daniel said. I did it because sabotage isn't the answer. But neither is pretending that corporate decisions don't have human costs. He hung up and sat down on the concrete floor, his back against the generator housing, feeling the weight of choices he couldn't control and consequences he couldn't escape. His phone showed 2:17 a.m. Lily would be asleep by now, safe in her bed, trusting that her father was doing the right thing. Daniel hoped he had been. But right now, in this moment, he honestly wasn't sure. Daniel made it home at 3:15 in the morning, exhausted and troubled in ways that had nothing to do with lack of sleep. He checked on Lily, sound asleep with her robotics notebook still open on her nightstand, then collapsed onto his own bed without bothering to undress. His phone buzzed at 7:30 with a message from Alexandra. Emergency board meeting, 9 a.m. Your presence requested. He groaned and dragged himself to the shower, then woke Lily for their usual Sunday morning routine. She took one look at his face and announced she was making the pancakes today because he looked like he'd been hit by a truck. Just a long night, Daniel said, accepting a cup of coffee she'd somehow learned to brew properly in the past month. Work stuff. The bad guy thing? Yeah, we caught him, but it's complicated. Lily flipped a pancake with the confidence of someone who'd watched him do it 100 times. Bad guys usually are. At least in the good stories. The boring ones just want money or whatever. The interesting ones think they're heroes. Daniel looked at his daughter with renewed amazement. When had she gotten so perceptive? That's exactly right, he said. This one thought he was protecting people. He was just doing it the wrong way. So what happens to him? I don't know yet. That's being decided today. They ate breakfast together in comfortable silence. Then Daniel left her with plans to visit her friend Emma while he dealt with whatever corporate reckoning awaited at Orion Tower. The boardroom was already full when he arrived, all 8 board members plus Alexandra and David Chen. The atmosphere felt heavy, charged with the kind of tension that preceded major decisions. Richard Sterling gestured to an empty chair. Mr. Carter, thank you for coming on short notice. We've been discussing last night's incident. Daniel sat, acutely aware that he was the only person in the room not wearing a suit. What would you like to know? Everything, Patricia Chen said. Start from when you identified the suspicious activity and walk us through to the arrest. Daniel recounted the investigation methodically. Tony's initial alert, the security footage analysis, the surveillance operation, and finally the confrontation with Marcus. He kept his tone factual, professional, leaving out his personal feelings about the Denver closure. When he finished, the board members exchanged glances. Morrison spoke first. Marcus Webb claimed he was trying to prevent the Denver division closure by sabotaging the Singapore project. Is that your understanding? That's what he told me, yes. And you talked him down, convinced him to surrender peacefully. I did. Richard leaned forward. How? What did you say that changed his mind? Daniel considered his answer carefully. I told him that sabotage wouldn't save anyone, that it would only justify the exact corporate philosophy he was fighting against, the idea that people are unreliable and systems matter more than human judgment, that if he wanted to make a difference, he needed to fight the decision the right way. The right way being what, exactly? Richard's tone suggested genuine curiosity rather than challenge. Transparency, documentation, showing the board that the people in Denver are assets worth preserving, not just expenses to eliminate. Daniel paused, then decided he was already in this deep, might as well be completely honest. I told him that revenge isn't justice. It's just more pain in a different direction. But I also told him I understood his anger, because closing that division is going to destroy lives, and someone should at least acknowledge that cost. The room went very quiet. Alexandra was watching him with an expression he couldn't read. Her father's face had gone carefully neutral. Finally, William spoke. You're suggesting the board hasn't adequately considered the human impact of the Denver closure? I'm suggesting that from Marcus's perspective, and probably from the perspective of 200 employees, it looks like the company values quarterly earnings more than the people who generate them. Whether that's true or not, the perception matters. Perception? Peterson's voice was sharp. We don't make multi-million-dollar decisions based on perception, Mr. Carter. We make them based on financial reality. And Marcus was about to create a very expensive financial reality by destroying your credibility during the Singapore implementation, Daniel countered, because he felt he had no other option. That's what happens when people feel invisible and disposable. They make desperate choices. So you're sympathizing with corporate sabotage? Peterson demanded. I'm explaining the conditions that create it. There's a difference. Richard held up a hand, stopping the argument before it could escalate. Let's table the philosophical debate for a moment. Mr. Carter, you prevented a significant security breach and protected company assets. That deserves recognition. The question now is what we do about Marcus Webb and what we do about Denver. They're connected issues, Alexandra said, speaking for the first time since the meeting began. Marcus's actions stemmed from desperation about the closure. If we prosecute him criminally, we'll have to explain his motivation publicly. That means acknowledging the Denver situation, which becomes a PR nightmare. If we handle it quietly, we look weak on security. There's a third option, Daniel said. Every eye turned to him. Don't close Denver, he continued, or at least don't close it the way you're planning. Marcus said you've tried restructuring and market repositioning, but have you considered different applications for that division's capabilities? Different markets or services that might be more viable? We've explored all reasonable alternatives, Peterson said flatly. The division's not profitable. End of analysis. Is it? Daniel challenged. Because from what I've seen in 2 months of managing infrastructure, this company tends to view problems through a very narrow lens. You optimize for short-term profit and assume that's the only metric that matters. But there are other kinds of value. Employee expertise, community presence, operational flexibility. Those things don't show up on quarterly reports, but they matter. Patricia Chen was nodding slowly. He has a point. Denver has institutional knowledge we'd lose permanently if we shut down. Some of our most experienced engineers work there. Experience we can relocate or replace, Williams argued. Can you, though? Daniel asked. How many of those 200 people would actually relocate versus just finding jobs elsewhere? And what's the real cost of rebuilding that expertise from scratch? Richard was studying Daniel with the same intense focus he'd shown during their first private conversation. You seem to have given this considerable thought for someone who learned about it 12 hours ago. I spent 8 years in the military watching commanders make decisions about resource allocation that got people killed or kept them alive, Daniel said. You develop strong opinions about cost-benefit analysis when human lives are the variable being calculated. We're not calculating human lives, Peterson protested. We're calculating fiscal viability. Those are the same thing, Daniel replied quietly. Every job lost is a life disrupted. Every family affected is a cost that doesn't appear on your spreadsheets. You can pretend there's a separation between business decisions and human consequences, but there isn't. There's just people choosing which costs they're willing to ignore. The silence that followed was absolute. Daniel could feel Alexandra's eyes on him, could sense the board members recalibrating their assessment of who exactly this infrastructure director was. Finally, Richard spoke. What would you propose we do differently? Daniel hadn't expected the question. I'm not a business strategist, Mr. Sterling. I fix generators and manage building systems. And yet you apparently have insights about corporate decision-making that we're missing. So I'm asking, if it were your choice, how would you handle Denver? Daniel took a breath, organizing thoughts he'd never expected to voice to this audience. I'd start by actually asking the people in Denver what they think. Not in a perfunctory way, but genuinely. They understand their market better than anyone in this boardroom. Maybe there are opportunities you're missing because you're too focused on what hasn't worked to see what might. We've consulted with division leadership extensively, Alexandra said. Have you consulted with the engineers, the technicians, the people actually doing the work who might have ideas their managers never thought to ask about? Daniel shook his head. Corporate hierarchy assumes wisdom flows from the top down. But some of the best solutions I've ever seen came from people at the bottom who just needed someone to listen. Morrison was making notes on his tablet. That's an interesting perspective, though implementing it would require significant time investment with uncertain returns. Less time than rebuilding institutional knowledge from scratch, Daniel countered, and potentially lower costs than the PR nightmare of closing a division because an employee felt desperate enough to commit sabotage. Richard sat back in his chair, his expression unreadable. Then, surprisingly, he smiled, that same sharp expression Daniel had seen before. Alexandra, you said hiring him would change things. I'm beginning to see what you meant. I'm not trying to change anything, Daniel said carefully. I'm just pointing out that the way things are isn't the only way they could be. Which is exactly what change looks like, Patricia Chen said. Someone standing in a room full of people who've always done things one way and suggesting there might be another path. She looked at Richard. I move that we table the Denver closure for 30 days while we conduct a comprehensive review involving employee input at all levels. If we genuinely can't find a viable alternative, we proceed as planned, but at least we'll know we tried everything. Seconded, Morrison said immediately. Richard glanced around the table, reading the room with the practiced ease of someone who'd spent decades managing board dynamics. All in favor? The vote was unanimous. Daniel felt something unlock in his chest. Not quite relief, because the outcome was still uncertain, but at least the possibility of a different ending existed now. Mr. Carter, Richard said, you've given us much to consider. Thank you for your candor, even when it challenged our assumptions. That takes courage. Or foolishness, Daniel said. I'm still not entirely sure which. In my experience, there's not much difference, Richard replied. Alexandra will update you on the Denver review process. In the meantime, what happens to Marcus Webb? Alexandra answered. Given that no actual damage occurred and Mr. Carter prevented the sabotage, I recommend we handle it internally. Terminate his employment. Require restitution for security costs, but no criminal charges. He made a terrible choice, but it came from loyalty rather than malice. That deserves some consideration. Agreed, Richard said. See to it. He stood, indicating the meeting was adjourned. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a new direction to explore. Let's not waste the opportunity. As the board members filed out, Alexandra caught Daniel's arm. That was either brilliant or career suicide. I haven't decided which yet. Probably both, Daniel admitted. But I meant what I said. Someone needed to point out that your decision-making process had blind spots. My father seemed almost impressed. That's rare. She paused. He wants to talk to you again, privately. I'm not sure if that's good or terrifying. Definitely terrifying. Should I be worried? With him? Always. But I don't think he's going to fire you. He respects people who challenge him, as long as they do it intelligently. You manage that. Richard appeared in the doorway. Mr. Carter, a moment. Alexandra gave Daniel a look that clearly said good luck, then left him alone with her father. Richard gestured to the chairs by the window overlooking the city. They sat, and for a moment the older man just looked out at the skyline with the contemplative air of someone measuring his legacy against the landscape. I had dinner with my daughter last night, Richard said finally. First real conversation we've had in months, maybe years. She told me you were responsible for that. I just suggested she give you a chance. You suggested I deserved one. There's a difference. Richard turned to face him. She also told me about your boundaries. Your insistence that fatherhood comes first, even when it conflicts with work. I told her that was naive, that you couldn't sustain that balance at senior levels. Did she agree? No, she defended you quite passionately, actually. Said you were proof that her philosophy wasn't just corporate idealism. That integrity and ambition could coexist if you were brave enough to demand it. Richard's expression softened almost imperceptibly. She believes in you, Mr. Carter, in what you represent. And I'm beginning to think she might be right. About what specifically? About everything. About the fact that success doesn't require the kind of sacrifice I've always assumed was mandatory. About the possibility that corporate culture could value humanity without compromising performance. About whether my entire philosophy of leadership has been fundamentally flawed. Richard's voice held a vulnerability Daniel had never heard before. I built an empire by treating people like resources, and I lost my daughter in the process. That's a trade I'm not certain was worth making. Daniel thought about his conversation with Lily that morning, about her observation that interesting bad guys think they're heroes. Richard Sterling wasn't a villain, he was just someone who'd optimized for the wrong variables and was only now beginning to understand the cost. It's not too late, Daniel said. You had dinner with her. That's a start. You voted to reconsider Denver. That's growth. People can change if they're willing to admit they need to. At 72 years old. Especially at 72. You've got less time to waste on being wrong. Richard laughed, a genuine sound of surprised amusement. My daughter said you were direct. She understated it considerably. He stood, extending his hand. Keep doing what you're doing, Mr. Carter. Keep challenging assumptions and protecting your boundaries. And keep reminding the rest of us that the numbers on a spreadsheet represent actual human lives. We need that perspective more than we're usually willing to admit. Daniel shook his hand, feeling the strange sense of having crossed some invisible threshold. When he'd walked into Orion Tower 3 months ago to fix a generator in crisis, he'd never imagined ending up here, influencing board decisions and counseling CEOs about their relationship with their fathers. Life had a way of taking you places you never planned to go. He left the building and drove home through Sunday afternoon traffic, his mind processing everything that had happened in the past 24 hours. Caught a saboteur, challenged a board, possibly saved 200 jobs while simultaneously risking his own. Not bad for a weekend. Lily was home when he arrived, sprawled on the couch with her laptop, apparently video chatting with Emma about their science fair project. She looked up when he entered and immediately read his expression. Good meeting or bad meeting? Weird meeting, Daniel said, but probably good. I'm still figuring it out. Did the bad guy go to jail? No. He lost his job, but no jail. Turns out he wasn't really a bad guy, just a desperate one. There's a difference. Lily considered this. Like you said at breakfast, he thought he was the hero. Exactly like that. She returned to her video chat, and Daniel retreated to the kitchen, making coffee he didn't really need just to have something to do with his hands while his brain processed. His phone buzzed with a text from Alexandra. My father just told me he's proud of me, first time in approximately 15 years. Whatever you said to him, thank you. Daniel typed back. I just pointed out that he was wasting time he didn't have on the wrong priorities. Apparently that qualified as profound wisdom. To him it did. He's been so focused on profit and performance for so long, he forgot there were other metrics that mattered. You reminded him. Happy to help. How was dinner last night? Awkward, hopeful. We're having another one next month. Small steps, best kind. There was a pause, then, I've been thinking about what you said, about fighting the right way. I want you involved in the Denver review, not just as infrastructure director, but as someone who understands what we're actually trying to preserve. Will you do it? Daniel looked at his daughter on the couch, thought about his promise to keep boundaries, to never let work consume the things that mattered most. Then he thought about 200 families in Denver who deserved someone fighting for them the right way. Yes. But with conditions. I'm not sacrificing my commitments to Lily. We work around her schedule, not through it. Agreed. Thank you, Daniel. For everything. He set down the phone and walked back to the living room, settling onto the couch beside Lily. She immediately rearranged herself to lean against him, still chattering to Emma about voltage calculations and circuit design, completely comfortable with his presence. This was what success actually looked like. Not corner offices or board meetings or six-figure salaries, though those things had their place, but being present for the person who needed him, building a life that balanced ambition with love, refusing to sacrifice one for the other. The following month unfolded with the kind of intensity Daniel was learning to recognize as normal for corporate leadership. The Denver review consumed enormous energy, conference calls with engineers, facility tours, financial modeling sessions, endless meetings where people argued about projections and possibilities. But Daniel kept his boundaries, made it to Lily's science fair where her renewable energy project won second place, maintained Saturday morning pancakes, left the office by 6 whenever possible and refused to check email after 8 p.m. And slowly, the Denver situation began to shift. Employee input revealed opportunities the original analysis had missed. Potential contracts with renewable energy companies, specialized training programs that could reposition the division's expertise, partnerships with local universities for research and development. None of it was guaranteed, but it was possible. And possibility was what had been missing from the original closure decision. 6 weeks after the board meeting, Alexandra called Daniel to her office with news. We're not closing Denver, she said without preamble. The board approved a restructuring plan that preserves the division while repositioning it for different markets. We'll still have some job cuts, about 30 positions, but we're offering relocation, retraining, and severance packages that actually respect people's contributions. It's not perfect, but it's better. Daniel felt relief wash through him. That's good news. It's your news. You're the one who convinced the board there was another way. Alexandra smiled. Marcus Webb sent me a letter from whatever job he's found. thanked me for not prosecuting him, and said he hopes the company actually learned something from his mistake. I think we did. What did we learn? That the foundation that keeps a company standing isn't just infrastructure and systems. It's people. Their loyalty, their expertise, their belief that what they do matters. You can't optimize that into a spreadsheet, but it's real, and it's valuable. She paused. My father's been talking to me more. Actually listening instead of just lecturing. We're rebuilding something, slowly. That's good, Daniel said sincerely. It is. And it's because you had the courage to tell him the truth when everyone else just told him what he wanted to hear. Alexandra stood and walked to her window, looking out over the city. I used to think leadership meant having all the answers, making the tough calls, optimizing for maximum efficiency. Now I'm starting to understand it's something different. What is it? Courage to admit you might be wrong, humility to listen to people you'd normally ignore, integrity to protect what matters even when it costs you something. She turned back to face him. You've taught me that, Daniel, by example, not lecture. By being exactly who you are and refusing to compromise it for corporate advancement. Daniel felt uncomfortable with the praise. I'm just doing my job. No, you're doing much more than that. You're changing the culture of this company one decision at a time. That matters more than any generator repair or system upgrade. 3 months later, Daniel stood in the mechanical room where his journey with Orion had begun, watching Tony train a new technician on proper generator maintenance protocols. The massive Cummins system hummed smoothly, its control panel now displaying the proper factory components they'd eventually installed to replace his improvised Arduino solution. Sarah appeared beside him, tablet in hand. Infrastructure performance metrics for the quarter just came in. 99.9% uptime, 0 emergency failures, preventive maintenance compliance at 100% across all systems. That's good work, Daniel said. That's your leadership, Sarah corrected. This department was barely functional when you arrived. Now we're the model other divisions are trying to replicate. That's transformation. It's just competence and adequate resources, which you fought for, which you convinced executives actually mattered. She smiled. Stop being humble. Take credit for success occasionally. Daniel's phone buzzed with a reminder. Lily's regional robotics finals started in 2 hours. He'd blocked the time weeks ago, made sure his schedule was clear, arranged backup coverage for any potential emergencies. I have to go, he told Sarah. Lily's competition. Of course, we've got everything covered here. Go watch your daughter be brilliant. He drove across the city in afternoon traffic, arrived at the competition venue with 30 minutes to spare, found Lily in the prep area making final adjustments to her robot with the focused intensity she brought to everything she cared about. Dad! She looked up with that smile that still made his heart catch. You're early. Wouldn't miss it. How's the robot looking? Perfect. I added a new stabilization algorithm that should give us an edge in the precision challenges. She demonstrated the modification, explaining the programming logic with the ease of someone who understood systems at a fundamental level. Watching her, Daniel saw himself reflected. The same analytical approach to problems. The same satisfaction in making things work properly, the same quiet confidence that came from competence earned through practice. But he also saw her mother's creativity, her ability to see solutions others missed, her gift for making complex things seem simple. She was becoming herself, and he'd been present for it. The competition began and Daniel watched from the audience as Lily's team navigated the challenges with practiced precision. Their robot performed flawlessly, smooth movements, accurate manipulation, elegant problem-solving translated into mechanical action. When the final scores were announced, Lily's team placed first, qualified for nationals, won the Engineering Excellence Award for innovative design. Afterward, driving home with his daughter chattering excitedly about nationals and the judges' feedback and the improvements she wanted to make, Daniel felt the deep satisfaction of a promise kept. He'd taken the job, accepted the promotion, built something meaningful at Orion, but he'd done it without sacrificing this, without missing the moments that actually mattered. His phone buzzed with a text from Alexandra. Board approved your budget proposal for next year. Full infrastructure upgrade, 3 additional positions, equipment modernization. Congratulations. He typed back. Thank you. Couldn't have done it without your support. We couldn't have done any of this without you. See you Monday. Monday arrived with its usual demands, meetings and decisions and the constant balancing act of corporate leadership. But Daniel had learned to navigate it now, to advocate for what mattered while maintaining the boundaries that kept him whole. At lunch, he met with the Denver division leadership via video conference, reviewing the restructuring progress and discussing new market opportunities. The conversation was hopeful, energized by possibility rather than weighed down by desperation. In the afternoon, he presented infrastructure performance metrics to the executive team, fielding questions about sustainability and long-term planning. Peterson still challenged his budget requests, but with less hostility now, more genuine engagement with the underlying logic. At 4:30, his calendar showed a meeting with Alexandra and her father. He walked to her office wondering what new corporate crisis awaited. Instead, he found them sitting together reviewing what looked like family photos on Alexandra's laptop, talking quietly about memories and choices and the complicated dance of rebuilding a relationship. They looked up when he entered, and Richard smiled. That sharp expression that Daniel had learned meant approval rather than challenge. "Mr. Carter," Richard said, "we were just discussing the quarterly review. Your department's performance continues to exceed expectations." "Thank you, sir." "Stop calling me sir. We've had enough conversations that you've earned the right to use my first name." Richard stood and extended his hand. "Richard, and I wanted to tell you that the Denver restructuring is working. Early results suggest we may actually turn that division profitable within 18 months. That's your doing." "It's their doing," Daniel corrected. "I just made sure someone listened to them." "Which is exactly what leadership should be," Alexandra added. "You've taught us that." Daniel left their office feeling the strange satisfaction of having influenced something larger than himself. He'd fixed generators and managed infrastructure, but he'd also changed minds, shifted priorities, reminded people that the metrics that mattered most weren't always the ones on financial reports. That evening, sitting at their kitchen table with Lily working on homework and Daniel reviewing reports, his daughter looked up and asked, "Dad, are you happy?" The question surprised him with its directness. "What makes you ask?" "You just seem different than you did a year ago. More like yourself. I wanted to make sure it was the good kind of different." Daniel set down his work and gave her his full attention. "I'm happy. The job's challenging and sometimes frustrating, but I'm doing work that matters with people I respect. And I'm still here for you, which is the most important part. So yes, kiddo, I'm happy." "Good," Lily said simply, and returned to her math problems as if she hadn't just asked one of the most important questions Daniel had ever been asked. Later, after she'd gone to bed, Daniel stood at their apartment window looking out at the city lights. Orion Tower was visible in the distance, lit up against the night sky, its systems running smoothly because people like him and Sarah and Tony kept them that way. He thought about the generator crisis that had started everything, about Alexandra's desperate challenge and his improvised solution. Thought about the path from that moment to this one, the promotion, the boundaries, the battles fought and occasionally won. He thought about Marcus Webb, who'd made terrible choices from good intentions, and Richard Sterling, who was learning that success measured in dollars sometimes cost more than it was worth. He thought about Alexandra, finding her way toward a leadership philosophy that valued humanity alongside performance, courage alongside competence. And he thought about Lily, asleep in her room, brilliant and fierce, and growing up so fast, the reason for every choice he'd made and every boundary he'd defended. The foundation of everything that mattered wasn't in the basement of Orion Tower with its generators and systems and mechanical infrastructure. It was here, in this modest apartment with the leaky bathroom and outdated appliances. In Saturday morning, pancakes and robotics competitions and homework help at the kitchen table, in being present for the person who needed him most. In understanding that the strongest foundations in life weren't built from ambition alone, but from trust and responsibility and the courage to change. Daniel had saved a company by fixing a generator, but he'd saved himself by remembering that some things were more important than any job, any salary, any measure of corporate success. And that was a lesson worth more than all the bonuses and promotions in the world. He closed the curtains and went to bed, ready for whatever challenges Monday would bring, secure in the knowledge that he'd built something real, not just at Orion, but in his own life. A foundation that would hold, not because it was perfect, but because it was built on the things that actually mattered. And that was enough.